What if the greatest trick of the spiritual path isn't mastering the divine, but convincing yourself that you're the one in charge?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Haanaan Wins. It is Saturday, August 8th, and honestly, I am feeling like I finally shed an old skin today. The heaviness in my shoulders is gone, and I am feeling light, caffeinated, and ready to dive in.
I'm feeling a bit more grounded, though a little wired from a long day of debugging code. I think I need a bit of that energy you're bringing, Emily.
Well, if you need a boost, we've got some strange news to balance out the heavy vibes. Did you see the reports out of Brazil? Capybaras are literally crashing the legislature. Just unbothered, chilling in the middle of political chaos.
Honestly, the capybara way is the only way to live. No hierarchies, no arguments, just vibes.
Exactly. Though, speaking of chaos, we're missing our resident comedian today. Paco is dialing in from home.
Hey Paco, we miss you here, but we hope the jaw is feeling better after that dental demon visit.
We're just glad he's back to eating more than just plain oatmeal.
True. Anyway, we have a heavy hitter for you today. We're moving into a text that is as polarizing as it is potent. We're looking at EA, Koetting's Evoking Eternity, Forbidden Rites of Evocation.
Oh, this one is spicy. It's all about that tension between the magician, as a commander, someone who demands presence from the external, and the ancient, much more terrifying ritual of total surrender. Is it true mastery, or just a very dangerous ego trip?
Let's get into the mechanics of command versus the ritual of losing oneself. Let's walk through it. Alright, let's open the book. We're looking at the introduction in Chapter 1. And right away, Koetting sets this stage with a pretty intense historical pivot. He starts talking about the first priests Ishtar, Yahweh, and says they didn't bother coming down themselves. They sent messengers.
Right? Like a cosmic bureaucracy. The gods stay in the high office, and the messengers do the legwork.
Exactly. But then he introduces the ambition of the practitioner. He says some priests were fine with just receiving help, but others started asking, how can I command these legions myself?
Of course. Because why settle for a blessing when you can try to put a leash on a demon?
That's exactly the energy he's leaning into. He even uses this striking imagery of angels turning oceans to blood and cities to ash. And he asks, and I'm quoting him here, how can I make them obey my will?
It's so aggressive. It's not, please guide me. It's, here is my command. It's almost like he's describing a hostile takeover of the spiritual plane.
And he links it to this old world idea of disease. He says, before antibiotics, people saw illness as a demon inhabiting the body like a vessel. And the doctors back then using herbs, prayers, water, they try to drive it out.
And he adds this dark little detail that sometimes the demon screams so violently while leaving the body that the exit caused more damage than the actual possession. That's a heavy way to start a manual.
It's visceral, but look at how he pivots from that painful exit to, well, envy. He says some people watched those exorcisms and didn't feel pity, they felt envy.
Because they didn't want to be cured. They wanted the power to call the thing out.
See, that's the pure chaos tactic I was telling you about, Seth. Why just fix the tooth when you can try to command the demon living in the root canal?
Spoken like a true comedian, Paco. But he's serious here. He claims that through the efforts of mages who weren't burdened by fear of God or devil, this art was perfected. He's saying you can pull an archangel onto a flaming chariot right into your temple to do your bidding.
It's such a massive distinction, though. He spends a lot of time clarifying the difference between invocation and evocation. He says invocation is bringing the power into yourself like a spiritual infusion.
But evocation? That's calling the entity out to manifest in front of you. To stand there, visible, so you can talk to it like a mortal.
Like an interview, but with much higher stakes and potentially more fire.
Precisely. And he even brings in this historical warfare aspect. He talks about ancient cities with massive walls. The defenders used invocation to call on gods to protect the gates. But the attackers used evocation to convince those same gods to leave the city unprotected.
That is actually terrifying. Using ritual to effectively evict a deity from a city? That's a level of spiritual sabotage I didn't expect from the intro.
It sets the tone for his main thesis. He claims that all this ceremoniary and Judeo-Christian coloring in modern magic is actually a harmful influence. He wants to strip away the beautiful Latin names and get back to the simple truths.
Simple truths involving commanding legions of darkness. Right, very simple.
But wait, look at his claim in Chapter 1. This is the heart of the architect angle we're discussing. He says that once you learn the basic principles, evocation isn't even an art or a science anymore. He says it becomes a basic skill, like reading or driving a car.
Wait, what? That feels like a massive downplay. You can't compare summoning a legion to parallel parking a sedan.
He literally says that. He says it's an instinctive skill. Once you master the principles, you don't need to refresh the basics. It becomes a fundamental part of the operator.
See, that's where I get skeptical. He's saying the details and the strict rituals of the old grimoires don't actually matter. He claims the success depends on the principles, not the specific names or the fancy pentagrams.
That sounds like a recipe for a disaster, Seth. I didn't use the right name, but I follow the principles. That's how you end up with a demon in your kitchen instead of a demon in a circle.
But that's his point, Paco. He's arguing that the superficial details are just window dressing. He thinks the true magic is the underlying mechanics of command.
So he's essentially trying to deconstruct the ritual into a technical manual. He wants to turn the mystical into the mechanical.
Exactly, he wants to move from the mysterious and inaccessible to a function of the spiritual structure of existence. It's an engineer's approach to the occult.
An engineer who thinks he can build a bridge to the divine using nothing but logic and a few basic principles. I'll wait to see if the bridge holds the weight of an archangel before I buy into that.
Okay, let's get into the meat of it. I'm looking at the text now, and Koetting pivots from all that grand talk of empires and warfare into something much more personal, much more raw.
I noticed that. It feels like he's stepping out of the history books and into a diary.
Exactly, he describes his first attempt at evocation. He's not in a temple with gold leaf and marble, he's in a cave. He's using a flat piece of metal as a ritual sword, and get this, he uses bags of flour to draw his protective circle.
Flour? Seriously? That's not a ritual, that's a bakery accident.
I know, right? He's even using a deep white bowl for porridge as an incense burner. He's basically de-ing the apocalypse. He says he goes up to a familiar cliff, enters a cave he'd consecrated months prior, and just starts. He's reciting words that he says were a cacophony in the midnight air.
And he says he was terrified by his own voice. That part actually hit me. The idea that in the silence of the night, your own ritual words sound lonely and disconnected.
Yeah. And then comes the sting. He says, I thrust the sword into the ground as the grimoire required and listened to the silence, waiting for a sign that I was not alone. But no one came.
Ouch. The classic ghosted by a demon moment.
Hey, at least he didn't have a microphone feedback scream like I did. A little silence is better than a piercing squeal, right?
True, Paco, but look at what happens next. He doesn't just give up and go home. He gets reproachful and humiliated by this failure, so he goes into this hyper-fixated study mode. He's reading everything. Crowley Shaw, texts on Sumerian civilization. He's obsessive.
It's like he's building a mental library so intense that the subject matter starts to consume him. He says he becomes observed with the Necronomicon and its demons.
And that's where the shift happens. He goes back to that same cave, but he's different. He says the words no longer sound like a cacophony. They flow from his throat and take life in the air. He describes the air getting thicker, the darkness deepening even under a full moon, and this undeniable presence filling the cave. And here's the kicker, the claim that defines his whole method. He says the spirit didn't appear in a visible material form, but he says the first principle of evocation was observed, and accordingly, success was achieved.
Wait. He's saying the ritual worked even though he didn't see anything? That's a huge leap.
That's exactly what he's arguing, isn't it? That the proof isn't a visual hallucination or a physical manifestation, but the subjective synthesis.
Right? He's tying it back to that idea of entering the image. He says a neophyte needs fanatical commitment to see even a finger of God, rather than just trying to manufacture a pretty picture. He says you have to immerse yourself in the doctrine, the philosophy, the very dogmas of the system.
So, it's not about what's out there. It's about making the ritual mechanism so real to you that your subconscious can't tell the difference between the magic and the floor you're standing on?
Precisely. He even quotes a Dr. Joseph Lisiecki here, who says this subjective synthesis allows the subconscious to create supernatural effects. He's saying the ritual is basically a way to hack your own perception.
It sounds so psychological. Like, if you believe the ritual is real enough, your brain provides the presence.
But look at the other way he presents it. He mentions a mentor who practiced hoodoo, someone who wasn't just reading books, but was making physical scented candles, inscribing sigils in wax.
Yeah, and that's the contrast. One is intellectual immersion, the other is ritualized, sensory, theatrical play. The mentor wasn't analyzing the magic, he was performing it to prepare himself for the grand rite.
So we have two paths, the scholar who thinks his way into a trance, or the practitioner who uses scent and wax to build a stage.
But both are trying to achieve the same thing, making the forces of the ritual as real as the surrounding physical reality.
And that's the terrifying part, because if you succeed in making the demon real to your mind, what happens when your mind decides it's time to let it out of the cave? Alright, let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about that subjective synthesis That idea of making the ritual so real that your brain can't help but react.
And he actually goes into some pretty wild detail about how people prepare for that. He says some practitioners are even decorating their lives to match the energy they want to call.
Yeah, he mentions people painting their rooms in colors that correspond to specific Sephiroth, the different spheres of the Tree of Life, and even wearing specific clothes every single day to honor a certain deity.
So, it's basically extreme method acting. I'm going to dress like a celestial bureaucrat so that when the bureaucrat shows up, I can hand him his paperwork.
Exactly. And he says others will perform daily rituals for a number of days equal to the numerological value of the spirit's name. If the name adds up to 7, you've got a 7-day commitment.
It's all about that preparatory immersion he mentioned earlier. He says the goal is to prepare yourself so that you can eventually accept that which seems impossible as that which is bound to happen.
Which sounds a lot like a fancy way of saying delusion.
But wait, look at the technical claim he makes here. This is where he gets really intense. He says that to achieve pure knowledge and power, the practitioner actually has to deactivate or reprogram the brain.
We deactivate the brain, like turn it off.
He says we have to reprogram it so that it ceases to interfere with the operation.
Good luck with that. My brain is a 24/7 news cycle of anxiety, and did I leave the stove on? You can't just hit the mute button on your own consciousness.
Actually, Jane, that's exactly what good comedy sit is. You shut off the thinking part of your brain and just let the rhythm take over. You become the punchline.
See, Paco's already mastered the coding method, but moving on, he addresses the amateurs here. He says most people just read spells straight from a grimoire and expect magic to happen.
And he's very critical of that. He says most grimoires aren't actually complete manuals. They're just records of what happened, not how to do it.
Right. He argues you need a proven working system. He says you shouldn't rely on your own whims or unverified instructions. You need a structure.
Which, strangely, sounds more responsible than the flour and porridge cave ritual he described earlier.
Well, he says the goal is to eventually build your own system, but only after you've mastered someone else's. You borrow the experience of others until you have enough personal occult force to create your own.
It's like learning to play jazz. You learn the scales and the standards before you start improvising your own solos.
Exactly, but then he takes a massive, almost frightening turn in the next section. He moves from learning the system to achieving omnipotence.
Oh boy. Here we go. The I am God phase of the book.
He says that humans, as we are, cannot do the impossible. We can't command the universe to move. Only God can do that.
So, what's the workaround?
He says, and I'm quoting him directly, to do the works of God, a person must accordingly become God.
Okay, that is a massive, terrifying claim. That's total spiritual insurrection.
That's some high-level tower energy right there. I'm renovating the temple, I'm claiming the deed to the property.
And he links this, becoming God, to a state he calls divine love. But, and this is important, he's not talking about being nice. He says this state is named that way because of the influx of powerful, useful force that's so overwhelming. The brain can't even process it.
He says the body can't even contain it. He describes tears flowing from the eyes because of the sheer grandeur of the power.
It sounds less like love and more like a massive, localized electrical surge. That's about to fry your nervous system.
He describes the actual ritual of it. He talks about the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, the LBRP, as a way to create a circle of eternity. He describes the magician tracing pentagrams in the air with a dagger, calling on the archangels Raphael, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel to descend.
It's so much theatricality. The candles, the incense, the blue flames appearing in the air. It's all designed to create this sacred space.
But all that work, the swords, the names, the circles, he says it's all just to prepare the ground for one thing, the middle pillar ritual. He says you visualize light descending through your body, through your energy centers, until you are filled with this divine love.
And then, once you've reprogrammed your brain, deactivated your logic, and become God, you just wait for the universe to obey?
He says that in that moment, the magician knows that the entire universe has gone silent, listening to their words, and is ready to obey.
It's an architect's dream, isn't it? Building a reality where your word is the literal law of physics.
But if the universe is listening to you, are you sure you're the only one talking?
That is the question we have to live with.
That's enough existential dread for one session. My brain needs a reset.
Agreed. Let's take 5 and clear the air. Alright, we're back. Alright, we're back. We've been sitting in the heavy aftermath of that last discussion on divine power, and now we're turning to the mechanics. Today we're looking at the architect side of magic. Is the practitioner a servant of the cosmos, or is he the one drawing the blueprints?
It feels a bit heavy, doesn't it? Like the weight is still in the room. But I'm ready to get into the actual work of it.
Let's just see if Koetting actually has a plan, or if he's just playing with matches.
Hey. Don't be so grim, Jane. I'm here, I've got my tea, and I'm ready to see some blueprints. Though if anyone starts talking about commanding galaxies, I might need a bigger mug.
We'll try to keep the cosmic collapses to a minimum, Paco. Let's look at the text. We're picking up where he talks about the search for the entity. He says the evoker isn't just looking for any spirit, but spends ages digging through grimoires to find that one specific entity that fits a particular goal.
It sounds so clinical, like he's searching a database. I need a spirit for X, let me check the archives.
Exactly. But then he pivots. He says, once you find them, once the name and the power are clear, you can't just say the name and walk away. You need dense contact. He describes this. This indigo light connecting the practitioner's spiritual body to the spirit's etheric body.
An indigo light? That sounds like a screensaver.
Hey, if I see a bright purple beam coming out of my chest, I'm definitely checking my pulse.
But look at what he says that light does. It's the conduit. It's how the spirit travels through dimensions to manifest. And this is the part where he gets really physical. He claims this connection allows the spirit to use the practitioner's own ectoplasm or prana to materialize.
Wait, so he's saying the spirit uses us as the raw material? Like we're the clay?
That's a huge distinction from the shamanic stuff we've talked about, Seth. In shamanic work, the practitioner is usually the one being moved or possessed by an external force. Here, Koetting is saying we provide the fuel for the entity to show up. It's a much more parasitic setup, isn't it?
It's certainly more architectural. He says this contact isn't just a vague energy flow, but is built through direct symbolism. He actually mentions hoodoo here, using rattles, snakes, mandalas, even specific foods and photos to create that link.
Now that I can get behind, I love a good ritual snack.
But then he moves into the West's primary tool, the sigil. He explains the mathematical matrices, taking a name, using a grid of letters and numbers, and drawing lines to create a unique identifier.
Which sounds very much like the reprogramming the brain claim he made earlier. It's all about creating a precise, coded trigger.
But then he throws a curveball. He says the real power isn't in the math. He says the rarest and most powerful sigils are the ones given directly by the spirit through channeling or intuition.
Right, and he gets almost spooky here. He says if you place parchment in the magic triangle where the spirit appears, they might actually leave a signature, a physical imprint of their presence.
Please. That sounds like a way to get a very elaborate ink stain on your expensive paper.
I don't know, Jane. I've seen some weird things happen when the energy is right.
He actually pushes back against the Disney version of this, saying there's a kernel of truth to spirits leaving a mark. But then, and this is a big but, he immediately undercuts it. He says any sigil you get through automatic writing or a Ouija board is likely just a product of your own subconscious and your own desires.
So the magic is just your own brain playing tricks on you.
He's setting a trap there. He's separating the self-generated from the spirit-given. But look at how he transitions into the spell section. This is the part that ties back to our theme of command. He writes, "To create universes, God speaks. To even destroy them, he whispers." The commands loudly pronounced by an evoker are the same as those from the eternal source.
Okay, that is massive. That is a huge, terrifying claim. He's equating the human voice to the divine voice.
That's more than magic. That's a heavy responsibility. If you're commanding galaxies, you better not have a stutter.
He's not joking. He says you can't just think strongly about making planets align. You have to use absolute authority. Your voice has to make the very molecules of existence vibrate with the knowledge that they must obey.
It's so aggressive. It's the total opposite of the surrender we see in many tantric or devotional practices. There's no room for a relationship here, only a hierarchy. It's all command and obey.
And he backs it up with the spell versus the incantation. The spell is the rhythmic singing part that pulls reality towards your will. But the command? That's just a declaration you aren't asking. You are stating a new fact for the universe.
And yet he admits even the most advanced systems still use the names of old gods and even threats of demons to force compliance. It's a messy, violent kind of authority.
But he ends this section with a warning for the dilettanti. He says if you just call a demon out of curiosity, nothing happens. You won't see the black eyes, you won't feel the breath.
Because you haven't prepared your perception.
Exactly. He says the true evoker, the one who has done the diligent study and the analysis, is the only one who can actually witness the horror. He tells a story about calling a watcher from the Necronomicon and saying that once the veil parted, the air itself moved. He knew it was there, but he wasn't ready to see it.
It sounds like the cost of this mastery is your own peace of mind. You've built the door, you've forged the key, but now you have to live with whatever walks through it.
Man, I think I'll stick to my tarot cards for tonight. At least the fool doesn't try to command the molecules in my sandwich.
Okay, let's slow down. We need to look at how he actually bridges the gap between the blueprint and the meeting. He says the second essential component for a new successful conversation with an entity is preparing your senses to perceive the unimaginable.
That sounds like a lot of pressure, like you're trying to tune a radio to a frequency that might actually break the hardware.
He actually makes a massive claim here. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, that all people see otherworldly entities constantly. He says we see them, but the brain just can't process it. We get a flash, an intuition, maybe an angelic face, but the brain just shuts it down because it's too much to bear.
So he's basically saying you're all seeing ghosts, you're just too stupid to realize it? That's a hell of a way to start a tutorial.
Well, he says the training, which he says is covered in Chapter 4, is about teaching the brain to interpret these things so you can chat with an entity as easily as friends over a cup of coffee.
Okay, so I'm summoning a demon. I'm inviting a stranger over for a latte. That's a very cozy way to describe a potentially life-altering encounter.
Hey, if the demon brings the pastries, I'm totally in.
But it's not all solo work. He brings up an old school technique, the medium. The idea is to use a person who can actually see and hear the entities as an assistant to the magician. The magician does the heavy lifting, the invocation, the divine love, creating the electromagnetic background in the temple, and then the medium acts as the herald.
So the magician is the architect, and the medium is the intercom system?
Exactly. And he says this is making a comeback. He claims that younger people, the ones starting out on this path, are less afraid of their own abilities. They're more open to seeing things.
I like that. It's like a shift in the collective psyche, moving from fear of the unknown to curiosity about the unseen.
Or just moving from fear to unfiltered chaos.
Let's look at the assignment part. This is where the architect really starts giving orders. He says once you've done the work, reached omnipotence, and established contact, you give the command. And this is important, it has to be done with absolute authority.
It's more than a request.
No. He says the voice should be deep, coming from the womb or the gut like an opera baritone. And wait, he warns, against screaming or crying or shrinking in fear. You have to stay composed. If you show even a hint of doubt, the whole operation doesn't just fail. It can turn against you.
That's the classic be careful what you wish for trap.
And the wording, he goes on and on about the wording. He says if you're sloppy, the demon will fulfill your wish in a distorted and harmful way.
Oh man, the monkey's paw effect. I've lived through that with a bad joke at a comedy club. You ask for silence and the whole audience leaves.
He actually gives a specific example. He mentions calling upon Count Salos. If you just ask for love, you might just get a postcard from your aunt.
See, even the demons are literalists.
But if you're specific, bring me a physically beautiful, mentally developed, emotionally stable woman for my sexual satisfaction, then you're getting what you actually want. He even suggests that despite the warnings about karmic debt, you can focus the demon on a specific person you're already interested in.
And there it is, the unethical side of the blueprint. He's basically saying, don't worry about the cosmic consequences, just get the girl.
He actually addresses this. He says the magicians of the right hand warn against this because it creates karmic knots by dominating another's will. But he claims that both the black magician and the great adept understand that necessity dictates the will to act.
It's such a cold, transactional way to look at the universe. No room for the divine love he mentioned earlier.
But there's one more thing. The command has to be from the heart. You have to release your personal attachment to the desire. You command, and then you let it go, trusting the entity to execute it. He says that once the command is given, the desire flies out of your body like an exhausted spirit that can no longer possess you.
Okay, stop. That is a massive red flag. He's literally advocating for a dissociation from the self. He's saying, ignore the person who has to live with the consequences. Focus on the god that does the magic.
Sounds like a great way to handle a craving for late-night pizza.
But then, the way he ends the ritual. This is where it gets messy. He describes his own early practice. He lived in a tiny apartment. He'd cover the windows in black, tape the doors shut to keep the energy in. And he says, and this is the kicker, he refused to use banishing rituals.
Wait, what? Why not?
He says he thought it was an insult to call a demon for help and then just unceremoniously kick it out like an uninvited guest. He'd just tell them to go and do the task, and then leave.
So he just left the demon energy just hanging out in his bedroom.
Exactly. He says his room became saturated with the energy of these entities. And he tells this story about a friend coming over, looking around, and being terrified because the room felt like pure darkness, even though the windows were wide open and the lights were on.
That is a heavy way to live. The architecture is there, the command is there, but the house is just full of ghosts he forgot to ask to leave.
Honestly, I need a minute to scrub my brain of that imagery.
Agreed. Let's step away for a second and grab some water. All right, we're back. We've been diving deep into Koetting lately, and today the air in the studio feels a bit different. A bit heavy.
Tell me about it. I woke up feeling like I was wearing a lead vest. I thought it was just the humidity, but looking at this text, it's almost like the book is manifesting in the room.
Careful, Em. Don't give the universe ideas. I'm calling in from home, by the way. Everything is totally normal here. No gelatinous masses or breathing issues, I promise.
Please, if there was a gelatinous mass in your living room, Paco, you'd be the first to post a TikTok about it.
Speaking of, we're looking at a passage from Evoking Eternity where Koetting describes something pretty unsettling. He's talking about his guest, his family starting to feel this stifling atmosphere, like they're walking through cobwebs, or even an invisible gelatinous mass.
That is so visceral. It's a physical obstruction, not even a bad vibe.
Exactly. And he goes on to say that his partner actually woke up in the middle of the night claiming she couldn't breathe.
Ugh, see, this is where I lose him. He's describing a literal respiratory crisis in his home, and his takeaway is, time to clean out the energetic trash.
But wait, Jane, look at what he says next. He admits that performing these demonic rituals near home or family can lead to depression, psychological dysfunction, and even heavy illness. He's actually warning against it.
Yeah. And here's the kicker. He says that even though the atmosphere was suffocating, that spiritual darkness was actually a superb catalyst for his evocations.
Wait, what? So he's saying the more toxic and heavy the environment, the faster the demons show up?
That's exactly his claim. He says the demons appeared with extraordinary speed and precision because of the darkness. He actually felt in his element in the dark.
That sounds like a recipe for a complete psychotic break. He's essentially saying my family is gasping for air, but hey, the magic is working great.
I mean, if you're looking for results, I get the temptation. But you can't just live in a haunted house and expect your kids to be okay. He even mentions that even if he works away from home, he feels obligated to clean his daughter's room of the energies he brings back.
It's so interesting, though, because it reminds me of those modern energy cleansing articles I was reading, about how to clear space in your mind or home to reduce stress. We treat it as self-care, but Koetting is treating it like decontaminating a nuclear reactor.
Right, but then he pivots to something that I find even more fascinating from a technical standpoint. He talks about the return to reality. He says the practitioner must exit the ritual space both physically and mentally.
Because the brain can't handle it?
Precisely. He says the human brain isn't capable of adequately processing the acausal experience of evocation. He suggests trivial activities, cooking, a walk, even watching a trashy talk show to bring your brain waves and blood flow back to normal.
I love that. The magic was intense, the demons were terrifying, but now, let's go watch the Jerry Springer show.
But look at the psychological implication there, Paco. He says that once you return, the whole experience feels like a distant dream, like it happened to someone else.
And he goes even deeper. He claims the person watching the talk show or making a ham sandwich isn't the person who performed the ritual. He says that person slept, while the god within the practitioner woke up to take control of their destiny.
Okay, stop. That is a massive red flag. He's literally advocating for a dissociation from the E-self. He's saying, ignore the person who has to live with the consequences. Focus on the god that does the magic.
This is where it gets really wild. He addresses the big debate, are these spirits real or just hallucinations? He says some people think they're just projections of the mind, just dopamine and endorphin rushes causing hallucinations.
And he's not even being polite about it. He says if you believe it's just biochemistry, then divine love is nothing more than mere euphoria caused by your endocrine system.
And he's basically saying if you fall for that, you're just a hostage to your own intoxication.
But then he brings in the other side. He says, look, if you see an ugly face, hear a growling voice, and smell something toxic and you get actual results, then the demon is real. He's basically using Occam's razor to argue for the literal existence of monsters.
It's such a polarizing way to look at the world. One side sees a neurochemical event, the other sees a battlefield.
And he ends this section by pivoting to angels, but not the cute cherubs on clouds kind. He talks about angels as forces of destruction, Samael bringing plague, Gabriel turning cities to sulfur.
It's all very heavy.
It is, and it leaves us wondering, is the architect of this ritual building so? We're moving from that heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the home into something much more structured. Koetting shifts gears here. He moves from the chaos of demonic incursions to the architecture of the divine.
It's like he's trying to find a way to map the madness.
Exactly. He starts talking about these entities, these angels, as warriors waiting for the moment when God calls them by name. He's describing them as an army poised to rush into battle.
An army, because nothing says peaceful spirituality like a cosmic infantry unit.
But look, he's grounding it in tradition. He says most of what we call angels comes from Judeo-Christian texts or occult schools like Rosicrucianism and Kabbalah, and he makes a really important distinction here. He says while a typical churchgoer might just pray to an angel or ask Jesus to send one, the Kabbalist has specific methods of evocation.
So it's more of a technical procedure than a request.
Right? It's about the tree of life. He describes it as an 11-part structure, where each Sephira, each Circe responds to a planet, an element, and an aspect of the divine.
And he claims each one is a home for spiritual entities.
Yeah, and he says the power of the magician comes from the vibration of the archangel's name. But here's the catch, and it ties back to what we were saying about commanding versus surrendering. He says these archangels are perfect for filling an evocator's desires, but only if that desire aligns perfectly with the angel's original purpose.
Oh, so you can't just ask the Sun Archangel for a raise in your salary if it's not solar in nature?
Exactly. He says if you need healing, don't go to Bina, the sphere of Saturn. Even if Saturn's energy could help, it's not their competence. You go to Netzach or Hod, it's like calling a specialist.
Speaking of specialists, I've been looking at his list as like a cosmic directory. It starts with Kether associated with Uranus and says Metatron rules it. It's about opening the divinity within yourself.
Then it gets dark again, quickly.
It does. He moves to Bina, the third sphere. He associates it with Saturn, and he says these angels rule over death, destruction, disease, and failure.
And wait, he says Bina is one of the 3 spiritual gates leading to the dark gods, and a causal dimension even deeper than the abyss.
See, there it is. We went from opening divinity to entering the dark gods in about 3 paragraphs.
It's a bit of a roller coaster, isn't it? But check out Hod Mercury. He says they rule over sciences, medicine, and alchemy. They can even use elements of the lower world for spiritual ascent.
It's interesting how he bridges the gap. He uses these high-level, almost mathematical structures, the planets, the elements, to make the unseen feel like something you can navigate. Like he's teaching you how to use a map of the territory that's constantly shifting.
But then he gets to that, the invisible Sephira. And this is where the whole structure starts to fray.
Yeah, he mentioned some theories that it's linked to Nibiru, or a wormhole between Saturn and Neptune. But then, and this is the part that really caught my eye, he says some believe Deat is the bridge between the tree of life and the Kalepoth, the tree of death.
The tree of evil.
Right, and he says the angels of doubt might actually be the demons of the Qliphoth. He says passing through Dot is the destruction of the lower self. It leads to the absolute destruction of individuality, or the rebirth of the eternal God.
That sounds like a lot of pressure for a Tuesday.
It's such a high stake. You're learning a skill and taking a total existential gamble. You either become a god, or you cease to exist.
And he ends this section by saying, despite all this complex mapping, there are outsider angels, entities that don't fit the Kabbalistic system at all. They just show up during the practice.
So, the map is useful, but the territory is still full of monsters that aren't even on the legend.
Which honestly is a pretty terrifying way to end the chapter. Okay, let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about the outsider angels, and Koetting actually starts to contrast them with the more manageable spirits. He says that some entities are quite beautiful, they speak with soft, pleasant voices, and they rarely take any form other than human.
Like the friendly versions of the divine.
Exactly. But then he brings it back to the heavy hitters. He says, in direct contrast, the archangels look like these massive figures whose power is simply too vast to be controlled or commanded. Their purpose is too unique, and their minds are too boundless to be outsmarted.
So, you can't trick them, but you can still... What? Ask them to do your laundry?
Well, he says the evoker can still achieve a state where these beings act quickly and clearly on your instructions, literally performing miracles. But, and here's the pivot, he moves immediately into demons.
And here comes a part where the sermon gets spicy.
Right. He starts by saying it's naive to think only uneducated Christians believe in a war between good and evil. He claims all of humanity is caught in this hopeless war, visible in every language and every sacred text.
He's leaning hard into that universal conflict idea we touched on earlier.
He is. He describes God, Satan, and their armies fighting with spiritual spears and ethereal swords, and says that Satan and his followers were cast down to earth. And he even pulls in other traditions. He mentions the jinn in Islam and the asuras in Hinduism.
Wait, so he's actually being inclusive?
In a weird, dark way. Yeah. He says the asuras are basically deities who lost their grace because of their thirst for power. But then, and this is where he gets skeptical, he says the classic image of demons as these stupid, weak, or sickly creatures is just something the church paid authors to write.
Yeah, the church paid for it. That's the classic everything is a conspiracy move right there.
But he uses it to make a point. He says if you look at real historical accounts of possessions, or horror movies, or actual encounters in real life, the classic demon doesn't match the reality. So he asks the big question, what are true demons and where can a mage find them?
He's looking for the real deal, not the Sunday school version.
And here's the technical claim. He says that a huge number of the entities we call demons in old grimoires are actually just planetary or sephirotic entities, or even just cultural egregores. He's saying that after you filter out the noise, very few things are actually demons.
So he's deconstructing the whole monsters under the bed thing.
He is. He says the true demons of the Qliphoth are a much harder group to define because their nature has been intentionally hidden from both written and oral traditions.
But he says they still show themselves if a black magician is brave enough to call them by name.
And he ties it back to that architect idea. He says God is like a great mathematician who maintains the universe in perfect equilibrium. Everything, every atom, every emotion has a counterpart. The tree of life is a masterpiece of balance.
But the Qliphoth is the shadow math?
Precisely. He presents two theories. One is that the Qliphoth and the Sephiroth were created at the same time to maintain a fragile equilibrium of opposites. The other, which he says is what unenlightened practitioners believe, is that the Qliphoth are just uncontrolled energies that leak out when a Sephira falls out of balance.
One sounds like a cosmic design. The other sounds like a cosmic plumbing leak.
He definitely leans toward the first one. He says the Qliphoth do exist as a spiritual phenomenon. You can see them through clairvoyance or visit them via astral projection. He's not just talking about metaphors. He's talking about a territory you can physically, spiritually inhabit.
And then he starts the roll call, the list of the unbalanced spheres.
Yeah, and it's heavy. He starts with Nehemoth, also called Lilith. He calls it the unbalanced reflection of Malkuth. He says its energy forces humans into passionate and sinful acts that drive them away from spiritual ascent and back into being instinctive, two-legged animals.
That's such a visceral way to describe losing your humanity.
It is. And then he moves to Gamaliel, the reflection of Yesod. He says its demons deepen the influence of Lilith, pushing moral animalism even further. He literally says, while the angels of Yesod teach the basics of white magic, the demons of Gamaliel poison hearts with malice.
It's like he's describing a slow-motion psychological rot.
Exactly. And then there's Samuel, the poison of God. This one is tied to Hod, the spear of science and medicine. He says, while the angels of Hod teach medicine, the demons of Samuel teach the worsening of health and forbidden alchemy that plunges the soul into darkness.
Forbidden alchemy? I mean, if it's not illegal, is it even magic?
He's not joking about the danger, though. He moved to Erev Zerach, the Raven of Dispersion. He says it's the distorted version of Netzach. He says when the balance between intellect and emotion is broken, these demons rule over unbridled passions, greed, jealousy, leading to things like theft and even murder.
It's also chaotic. There's no way to escape the consequences of these energies.
There's no escape because according to him, the structure requires them. He moves to Tagiron, the Disturbers of Peace. He describes these demons as black giants full of rage, who make families, nations, and even worlds rise up against each other.
It's a personal ritual that triggers a global war.
That's the scale he's working with. And then, the list gets even more intense. He talks about Golachab, those who burn with flame. These demons turn the sun's abundance into disaster and fire. They are ruled by Asmodeus.
Man, this list is getting longer and much, much darker.
It is. He reaches Gaghabla, the one who disturbs all things. He says the purpose of these demons is to teach the black magician the mysteries of the Qliphoth, so they can use that same energy to reign as a god of darkness on Earth.
So the goal isn't just to survive the darkness, it's to weaponize it.
And finally, he ends this section with Sartorial P. Concealers. The reflection of Bina. He says their power is to hide things, to keep secrets. And while that might not sound impressive at first,
I bet there's a catch. There's always a catch with these secrets.
Man, I need to step away from this darkness for a second before I start seeing shadows in the corner.
agreed. Let's take 5 and grab some water. All right, we're back. All right, we're back. We've just spent the last hour tracing the descent from the Sephiroth into the shadow, and frankly, the air in here feels heavy.
That's because we're looking at the cliff oath. Seth, it's not exactly a spa retreat.
Hey, I'm really enjoying the vibe. It's like the part of the movie where the music gets all low and ominous right before the monster jumps out.
But look, we need to ground this. We're talking about the mechanics of command. The author, Koetting, is making a huge claim here about why these dark spheres even exist. He says their most important function is to teach hidden or secret sciences, specifically those that lead back to chaos or destruction.
Right? He's framing the Kalifkoth as a classroom, a brutal one. He says these secret operations are the keys to demonic power.
Demonic power. Such a loaded term. He's essentially saying that if you want the real, raw, unpolished truth, you have to go where the rules break down.
But look how he starts categorizing them. He's moving through the spheres like a tour guide through a haunted mansion. It gets to Thamiel the Ninth Cliffa-and says it's the only one that exists on both the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death. It's the bridge.
It's the point where life and death, good and evil, fall and ascension are inseparable. It's a beautiful, if terrifying thought. It's that moment of total paradox.
But then he moves to Gaihil, and the tone shifts. He calls it the unregulated reflection of Chakma. He literally translates it as the hindering.
Spoken like a true pessimist.
No, but listen to what he says the result is. He says the energies here cause self-deception, delusion, and suppression. He's saying the very structure of this sphere is designed to prevent you from reaching your potential.
That's so visceral. He's describing a psychological trap, a cosmic concept. It's that feeling of being stuck in your own head, unable to see the truth because you're too busy lying to yourself.
And then we hit the heavy hitter, Thamiel, the split god.
This is where it gets really dark. He says the forces here create a great division between humanity and the divine. He says the lower is completely severed from the higher. The light literally cannot penetrate the darkness.
And he names the ruler Moloch, or Satan. He's not playing around with metaphors here. He's presenting a total rupture in a universe.
Wait, Sel. If the light can't get in, what's the point of the ritual? If the connection is severed, why are we even talking about evocation?
That's the pivot, Paco. This is the most important part of his argument. He says that while all this numerology might look grotesque or senseless in a ritual context, it's indispensable. He claims that just by meditating on these names, you can force these energies into your life.
He's moving from theory to practice. He's saying the names are the tools.
But look at what he says about the proof. He claims most of these demons aren't even in the old books. He says they are discovered through the evocation of the Ardamin of that sphere.
So he's basically saying the best secrets aren't in the manual. You have enough to go out and find them yourself by talking to the boss?
Exactly. He's claiming the most potent knowledge is found in private diaries, not established grimoires. It's a very maverick approach. It contradicts the idea of a stable, inherited tradition. It's pure, unverified exploration.
And then he goes on the attack. He blames the stereotypes and fears about demons on, well, the church.
Here we go. The classic, it's all a conspiracy move.
He's quite blunt about it. He says the church funds the movies and the legends specifically to spread the idea that demons only want your soul. He calls it a distorted reality.
But he makes a wild claim about the actual practitioners. He says Catholic exorcists have a lifespan of no more than 15 years once they start the fight. He says they die of heart attacks or terrible tragedies because the rituals they use are too effective for people who aren't actually practicing the dark arts.
That is a massive, unprovable leap. They die because they use too much power? That's just convenient storytelling.
It's a way to validate the black magician as the only one who can handle the truth. But look at his nuance elsewhere. He does acknowledge that many of these demons are just egregorial entities or archetypes.
Right, he's not saying they're all literal monsters from a basement. He says they are different names for the same entities. He even compares the Christian demons to pests or goblins, minor tricksters who can do a small trick but can't cause real deep change.
He basically calls the demons from the Bible low-level pests. He says they're white goblins that can do a little poltergeist trick, but they lack the power of the true chaotic Kalifothic demons.
So, according to Koetting, the demons you're afraid of are actually just annoying house guests?
It's a fascinating reframe. He's stripping the terror away from the orthodox demons to make room for something much more dangerous. He's saying the real power isn't in the demons that want your soul, but in the ones that want to dismantle your reality.
It's a move of pure deconstruction. He's taking the scary out of the tradition to make the chaos feel more accessible.
But we have to look at how he handles the history. He brings up the idea that one person's god is another person's demon. He cites the idea that Astaroth is just a disguised version of the goddess Astarte.
And he immediately shuts down the historical argument. He says even if that's true, it's useless for magic.
Exactly. He argues that even if the etymology is the same, the nature is different. Astarte is passion and love. Astaroth is a great infernal duke of the learned sciences. He's saying the genealogy of the name doesn't matter, only the function of the entity in the ritual.
So it's not about where they came from, it's about what they do when you call them.
Which brings us right back to the architecture of command. If the names are just labels for functions, then the magician is the one defining the reality. So, we've been arguing about whether these entities are external beings or just psychological projections. But Koetting actually steps right into the middle of that debate here. He says that theorists might argue the demon is just created by the magician's mind or nourished by the power of belief.
The classic, it's all in your head defense.
Yeah, but look how he shuts it down. He says, regardless, the demon described is exactly the demon that appears when his name is called. And then this is the kicker. He claims that through ritual practice, you can learn more than 1,000,000 years spent in a library chair.
I mean, as someone who spends way too much time reading, I feel attacked. But he's making a point about experiential knowledge versus theoretical study. He's saying the ritual is the laboratory.
It's like saying you can read 1,000 cookbooks, but you don't know what a steak tastes like until you actually cook it.
Or until you burn the kitchen down.
Speaking of burning, he shifts gears now. He moves away from the heavy cosmic hierarchies of the Calliope and starts talking about something much more accessible: elemental spirits.
Oh, I love this part. He describes them as these forces in nature that connect the organism of nature on the astral plane and above. It's very much about finding the sacred in the physical.
He's basically saying the earth, the water, the wind, they aren't just dead matter. They have personalities.
Right. And he gives us a breakdown. He starts with fire. He links them to the salamanders. He says they can ignite passion and emotion, or even fury and aggression. He even says they can destroy obstacles in the evoker's path.
Sounds like a great way to ruin a relationship, or a dinner party.
But look at the hierarchy. He says they are ruled by an elemental king jinns. There's a structure. Even the elements have a royal lineage.
And then he moves to water. He uses the term undines these water nymphs who look like beautiful young women, usually with bare breasts.
Of course, because even in a textbook on advanced occultism, we can't escape the male gaze.
Oh, hush, Jean. He's describing an archetype. He says they help with emotional maturity and even reproductive matters. And he links them to Neptune, so intuition and clairvoyance.
Okay, but wait. If the Undines are all about intuition and the Salamanders are about passion, what about the Earth spirits? The gnomes?
He gets very specific here. He says they are short, squat creatures from Norse and Scandinavian myth. And while they can boost your physical strength or mental endurance, the real reason people call them is, well, their power over the treasures of the earth.
Translation, call the gnomes if you want to get rich.
And he admits they are much less willing to give out large sums of money than angels or demons. So, even the earth spirits have a budget.
Exactly. They have their limits. But then we hit the air spirits, the sylphs. He says they look exactly like the fair ease you see in movies, beautiful, small, with wings and childlike faces.
He calls them innocent and sometimes even playful, though he warns they might be too much for a serious practitioner.
I can see that. A playful spirit sounds like a great way to end up with a localized tornado in your living room.
Actually, he says they can bring storms and hurricanes, or even the effect known as levitation. He says they are incredibly effective if you need to improve your mental characteristics or absorb complex ideas.
So, fire is for passion, water is for intuition, earth is for gold, and air is for...
That's a way to put it. But then he moves into something much more complex. He distinguishes between planetary spirits and planetary minds.
This is a really important distinction for the mechanics of the work. He says the spirits are the ones who act to change reality, the ones you call if you want quick and precise changes.
But the minds? They are the intellectual aspects. They hold the knowledge. He says, if the evocator needs information and not changes in reality, one should invoke the planetary mind.
So, the spirit is the muscle, and the mind is the library.
Precisely. And here's where he makes his most controversial claim yet. He says these planetary entities are even more ancient than the Kabbalah. They predate the Tree of Life itself.
Wait, so he's saying the stars and planets had these personalities before the whole Jewish, Christian, or even Greek religious systems even existed?
He does. He says the Chaldeans and Sumerians looked at the sky and assigned these powers to the planets, creating a system that would underpin all future religions. He's claiming a sort of primordial magic that exists beneath the surface of all organized religion.
It's a very foundational way of looking at the universe. It takes the pressure off the specific dogma and puts it back on the celestial mechanics.
It's a very convenient way to claim his method is the original one.
But then, the tone gets very heavy again. He moves to the spirits of the dead, and he goes into this whole discussion about how people perceive the deceased.
He talks about the good people becoming angels, and the villains becoming restless, malevolent shadows that continue their evil deeds in the subtle body.
That sounds exhausting. Just a whole planet of ghosts trying to reenact their worst moments.
He describes a middle ground, too. The victims of tragedy, the shadows that are trapped in a loop of their own suffering. He says they are echoes that we mistake for actual voices.
That's actually pretty bleak.
It gets darker. He says these aren't really spirits in the way we think. He calls them empty shells, the hollow shells of souls that once lived, without any purpose or direction. They are like a beam of light from a source that went out thousands of years ago.
That's such a haunting image. Just a lingering glow with no flame left inside.
And he says they aren't there to be helped. You can't help them find peace. You can only use them.
Right. He says they are real, but they are hollow. And because they are so empty, they will take any command, not only with joy, but even with greed.
So, you're not talking to a person. You're talking to a vacuum that's just waiting to be filled with your will.
And that is the definition of the architect we've been talking about. The magician isn't communicating with a peer. They are directing a void.
Honestly, I need a moment to process that void stuff before my brain melts.
Perfect timing, the Porvian food is here.
All right, we're back. All right, we're back. We're settling into the heavy stuff now. We've been talking about the hierarchy of power, but Koetting is starting to pull us down into the lower strata.
The basement of the spiritual world. It feels heavy.
Exactly. He's moving from the grand architecture of angels to something much more visceral. Look at how he describes these spirits of the dead. He says they don't have the cosmic stamina to reshape the stars like angels do. And this is the chilling part. He says they are incredibly fast and diligent when it comes to causing misery.
Fast and diligent. Like a specialized strike team for bad vibes.
Precisely. He claims they work specifically to cause unhappiness to the magician's enemy, and he gets really specific about the symptoms. He says it starts with nightmares and in some cases ends in suicide.
That's a heavy claim to drop without a disclaimer. He's not even talking about metaphor here. He's talking about a literal, biological end.
But see, that's the thing. He's differentiating the type of power. Angels are the long-term planners, the architects. These dead spirits, they're the insurgents. They don't care about the big picture of the cosmos. They just want to cause immediate localized chaos.
It sounds so predatory, like they're just feeding on the friction.
And then he pivots to what he calls wandering spirits. This is where he gets a bit more, well, let's say unstructured. He describes these ritual sessions in the Southwest Desert. He's out there in the middle of the night, red sand, cactus silhouettes, just a circle of friends under a giant moon.
I can see it. A bunch of us probably arguing about whether the mood is too bright for a proper ritual, smoking cigarettes, just being antisocial in the desert.
Exactly. He says they gather, light up, and wait for this critical mass of adventure. He describes the summons. It's almost communal. We join hands as Dark Brothers. We call the forces of darkness to enter the circle.
Sounds like a very intense summer camp.
But look at the imagery he uses for the response. He says they'd see, through eyes or mine, countless images of spirits racing through the desert toward our circle, like a horde of frenzied rabbits, trying to reach those who dared to call them, with noise and clamor.
Frenzied rabbits? That's such a strange, almost frantic way to describe a demonic manifestation. It's not this looming dark shadow, it's this overwhelming, chaotic swarm.
It's the lack of individual identity. That's the key. It calls them astral parasites later on, quoting Donald Michael Craig. They don't even know who they are. They're just energy formations.
Right, and that ties back to his earlier point about the subjective synthesis. He's saying these things are so low level they can barely move a Ouija board. but they can still overwhelm your senses.
Wait, so he's saying the most dangerous thing isn't a powerful demon with a plan, but a mindless swarm that just happens to be there?
Exactly. He says they lack the power to change destiny, but they can usurp your time and energy. They're the spiritual equivalent of a DDoS attack.
That actually makes a lot of sense psychologically. It's not the big trauma that breaks you, it's the constant, tiny, unpatterned intrusions.
But then, Seth, look at how he moves from that chaos back to the master. He says once you've mastered the principles, even the gods will appear at your throne to do your bidding. Talk about a massive power jump.
It's a huge leap. He goes from frenzied rabbits to divine omnipotence. But he tries to bridge it with this idea of preparatory work. He says you can't just show up to a ritual and wing it. You have to have absolute unwavering intention.
Here we go, the just believe part.
No, it's more technical than that. He's actually criticizing the internet era of magic here. He says, while we have all this info online, it's actually harder to find the golden grains of truth because there's too much noise. He tells this story about experimenting with mirrors trying to find a ritual to squeeze Satan into my room with all the smoke and flames.
I love that. Squeezing Satan into a room, that's such a DIY project.
He was getting bad advice. People telling him the mirror had to be at a 45-degree angle, or the sigil had to be perfectly centered. And then he hits on this brilliant, counterintuitive piece of advice. He says, forget the mirror, and understand that what you see before you is what you see before you.
That's a huge moment. It's moving from the mechanical, the angles, the tools, to the perceptual. It's about the presence.
And he tells you how to study an entity. He says, ask about this entity as you would ask about a beautiful woman or a strong man. Trace the lines of her body, the strength of his gaze. He wants you to build a mental, visceral familiarity before the ritual even starts.
So, you've already met them in your mind, so when they show up, there's no shock. There's no stochative synthesis he mentioned earlier.
Exactly. And here's the warning, he ends this section with a heavy dose of secrecy. He says the moment you start broadcasting your workings to the world to look important, you're inviting doubt. The moment you even decide to share your secrets, doubt penetrates your mind.
The classic, keep your cards close to the chest rule. If the neighbors know you're summoning a legion, the magic is already dead.
It's the tension between the ego wanting credit and the ritual needing isolation. You can't be a master if you're too busy being a performer.
So we're picking up right where he leaves off with that warning about secrecy. He says that the very desire to discuss your work with the uninitiated, the unproven, is already proof of your own insecurity.
Ouch. He's basically calling out anyone who posts a ritual photo on Instagram.
Exactly. He says it's a need for self-affirmation. He argues that your relationship with a demon or an angel or an elemental is sacred and personal. He actually tells the reader to study the entity, ask others who have had similar relationships with it, but then, and this is the kicker, to treat that information like a secret of a close friend that you swore never to reveal.
I love that. It's so intimate. It's not about building a database. It's about building a bond.
But then he takes this intimacy and turns it into something much more aggressive.
Right? He pivots. He moves from keep your secrets to how to invoke your own omnipotence. And he uses a very specific, very provocative phrase here. He says the best way for an evoker to open their sense of omnipotence is to act not in the manifestation of their holiness or compassion, but in the manifestation of their power.
Wait, what? Not holiness or compassion? That's a direct shot at almost every major religious tradition.
It's a total reversal. Usually you're told to be humble, to be good. He's saying no, be strong, be effective.
And he backs it up with this claim that as you succeed as one ritual follows another, all your rational attempts to dismiss it as coincidence just melt away like smoke. He says you realize you possess power and that you are the embodiment of power.
And that's why people flee back to Orthodox religion, right? Because the alternative is too much to handle.
Yeah, he says the successes make neophytes run back to the arms of traditional religion or just forget magic is even fun and amusing until the moment the summoned spirits actually show up and the universe starts obeying your commands.
The universe, smiling and beginning to obey. It sounds like a god complex in a manual.
I mean, if it works. Does it matter if it's a god complex? If the stars start moving when I say so, I'm not complaining.
But he tries to ground this power with a specific practice. He says you need a meditation that balances humility before infinite power with the confidence to command it.
But look at the setup he requires. It's so austere. He says you need a place that is isolated from the rest of the world. No furniture, no decorations on the walls, no windows, just one single door.
So, a very expensive, very empty closet.
He calls it a vacuum in space, untouched and untouchable. And then he gives the actual instructions. He says, sit in a chair in the center of the room, facing north. Close your eyes and wait 30 seconds to get used to the new sensations.
He's literally guiding us through the breathing. Focus on the sensation of the air entering your mouth, your throat, your lungs. He wants you to feel the expansion of your chest.
It's a way to ground the body before the ascension part starts.
Exactly. And then he moves the focus from the body to the environment. He tells you to look with eyes open or close at the airborne space around you. He says to visualize tiny particles of air as microscopic prisms, catching the light, glowing like tiny suns.
He's asking us to hallucinate 1,000,000 tiny suns in the middle of an empty room.
But he preempts that. He says, do not expect to see this with your ordinary vision, but let the awareness of it penetrate your mind, even if your rational mind tries to shake your confidence. He's literally telling you to ignore your own skepticism.
It's that subjective synthesis again. He's trying to bypass the rational part of the brain that Jane is clinging to. He wants you to know it's real even if you can't see it.
And then it gets intense. He says to feel the heat of this light, to feel it pulsing in the air. He wants you to breathe this light in until the air itself becomes light.
And here's the final instruction of this chuck. He tells you to breathe the light into your lungs, into your torso, to let it tickle your insides. But, and this is the important part for the clearing, as you exhale, you aren't exhaling the light. You are exhaling your anxieties, fears, guilt, and any negative energies.
He wants you to visualize it as a brown, oily haze.
That's a gross image.
But it's a functional one. He's setting the stage. You clear out the oil, you fill yourself with the light, and then you're ready to meet the things he was talking about earlier. The frenzied rabbits and the commanding gods. Okay, let's look at where that light goes. He's describing the exhale now. He says this dark, oily haze, all that anxiety and fear, it's literally being purged. It seeps from your mouth as you breathe out.
In the light that stays in the room, he says it's pure light that can't be stained. It just dissolves that junk the moment it leaves you.
Sounds like a very intense detox. Forget juice cleanses, just breathe in divine radiance.
But look, he's pushing it further. He says the light is healing your organs and tissues, purifying your blood and your heart. He actually uses a biblical reference here, the woman who is healed of her bleeding by touching the hem of Jesus' garment. He wants you to feel that same healing power entering you with every breath.
And no matter how much you breathe, the light in the room will not diminish, because it is an overflowing source of power and light. That's a heavy promise.
It's beautiful, but then he shifts. He says when you feel like you can't contain it anymore, you have to turn your gaze inward.
Yeah, and this is where the subjective synthesis gets real. He says you should feel this light inside you, shining like 1,000 suns. He describes it bursting out through your skin, not bound by your flesh, but free for creation.
Free for creation. Spoken like a true architect.
He's getting very physical about it, though. He says you'll feel a tingling of the skin. That's the pure light of creation emanating from you. He even suggests it's more intense in your face, your hands, and your palms.
And then he hits the heart. He says the light pours from your center, streaming from your heart like an infinite fountain of love.
Okay, that sounds lovely, but wait, look at what he says about your hands. Let your hands hang at your sides, palms up, fingers naturally curled upward. He says the power is just waiting there, waiting to be directed.
And here's the pivot back to that power versus compassion thing we were just talking about. He says once this flow is clearly tangible, you take a deep breath, hold it, and realize this is the same power and wisdom that created the universes.
Talk about an ego boost. You contain the power of the Big Bang in your chest cavity.
Eat your blade tinctured.
But wait, look at the warning. He says you can use this to issue any command with no shadow of fear and everything will obey. But, and this is the kicker, he says, do not let the feelings of bliss and meekness overcome you.
Because that's the trap?
Exactly. He says the bliss is the most debilitating effect of this state. It makes you weak. Instead, he tells you to let those blissful emotions flow out of your hands, your eyes, your mouth, spreading the light into the darkness of the lower worlds.
So, don't get too cozy with the feeling of being a saint, or you'll lose your edge.
He wants you to use the light to subjugate, subjugating everything there to the power of your will. It's back to the command. It's back to the architect.
And then he describes this discharge. He says you might feel an impulse to do something dramatic like a Pentecostal dance, or something as simple as a whispered thank you. But he warns you, don't waste this electrifying power on trivial things. Don't use the generator that lights the stars just to power a desk lamp.
It's so much pressure. He says to do this release, to exhale everything until you feel exhausted.
He says it feels like the exhausted lightness you get after intense sexual intercourse.
Well, there it is, bringing it back to the physical, as always.
He's certainly not shy about the biology of it.
But he says this: exhaustion is necessary. It cleanses you of the light you've inhaled, so you can prepare for the actual evocation. He says, do this once a day, and the power will grow until you can stand adequately in the presence of your divine self.
And then we move into the tools. And honestly, this is where I start to roll where I really start to get skeptical.
You're looking at the armory. He starts listing all these elaborate, expensive-looking ritual tools. Robes inspired by ancient Egypt or Judea, embroidered with numerological symbols.
Here we go. The theatrical part.
He describes an altar made of 2 square boxes, a table of union with Enochian words in different colors, 4 elemental tables on the walls, a ritual wand, a dagger, a double-edged yellow dagger inscribed with Hebrew names,
And a wand with a wooden handle, magnetized wire, and an acorn-shaped knob painted yellow and red. This sounds like a high-end magic shop catalog.
It's so much. He's talking about silk draperings, crystal headbands, even sandals made of actual camel hair.
I mean, if you can find a camel hair, go for it. I'm sure it really helps with the subjective synthesis.
But, and this is the important part, he actually addresses that. He says, from a rational and sober point of view, all these extravagant ritual tools have no value in themselves.
Really? He's debunking his own list?
He is. He says that theatrical beauty is for the sake of tradition, not practical necessity. But, and here's the loop. Back to the beginning, he argues that for someone pursuing spiritual goals, these trinkets are necessary because they fulfilled a second principle of evocation, using a proven working system.
So the tools aren't the magic. They're the training wheels for the master.
Exactly. They are the long preparation to help you reach that state of omnipotence he was talking about. He's saying the ritual is the process of building the I that is capable of commanding the universe.
Oh, hang on, I hear a doorbell. The Korean food is here.
Yes. Thank God I'm absolutely starving.
All right, we're back. We've been talking about the mindset of the practitioner, but today we're getting into the actual, the hardware. We're looking at the physical setup Tuting prescribes in Evoking Eternity.
The hardware. It sounds so industrial, doesn't it? Like he's setting up a laboratory instead of a sacred space.
Hey, if you want to summon a demon, you might as well have a clean workspace. You don't want your ritual interrupted by a pile of dirty laundry or, an unorganized desk.
It's not about organizing, Paco. It's about whether the tools actually do anything or if they're just props for a costume party.
That's actually exactly where he starts. He's quite dismissive of the fancy stuff. He says if the bright colors and whimsical words of systems like the Golden Dawn get in your way, you can use these simpler tools instead. He claims these simple tools are sufficient to create a universe from the flesh of the gods you struck.
From the flesh of the gods. That is a bit much, isn't it?
It's dramatic. But let's look at the first item, the Atham-D ritual dagger. He says the handle must be black, the blade at least 6 inches. And here's the kicker. He tells you to ignore all those light neo-pagans who say you shouldn't cause harm. He says if the blade isn't sharp when you bought it, you sharpen it yourself.
I love that. Don't be a pacifist, just make sure the edge is clean. It's very direct.
But he also warns against the Gothic trend. He says, avoid all these trinkets. No fake gemstones, no overly decorative handles. Just simple.
It's interesting because it contradicts that idea of ritual as theatrical. He's stripping the feeder away to find the utility, like he does with the second tool, the bowl.
Right. He says it has to be solid bronze, tin, or silver, no plating, and no engravings. He actually mocks the idea that the bowl is symbolically connected to the element of water. He literally says the purpose of the bowl is to hold liquid. That's it.
Brutal. Don't give me the poetry, just give me the vessel.
He's treating these like engineering components. And it continues with the altar. He says it should be waist high, matte black, or unpainted. And get this, he says you can literally just use a piece of particle board or a modified coffee table. He's basically saying, don't go out and spend a fortune, just build a rectangle.
It feels very low energy, in a way, but it's purposeful. He wants to remove distraction. If the altar is too pretty, you're looking at the altar, not the entity.
But then he pivots. He moves from this simple utility to the most massive, heavy concept in the book, the circle. And he completely flips the script on what a circle is.
Yeah, this is a huge moment in the text. He says the common belief that the circle is a protective barrier. To keep things out is a mistake. He says a true evoker knows that even a protected circle can't stop a spirit that is omnipresent.
Wait, so if the circle doesn't protect you, why bother drawing it?
Because it's not a shield, Paco. He calls it a centrifuge of creation. He says the circle is the primordial eternal center from which everything manifests. You aren't hiding inside it. You are using it as a launchpad to pull things into reality.
He literally says the circle is not a prison for the spirit, but a platform for it to enter our world.
That's such a massive reframe. Most people think of ritual magic as trapping, something in a triangle or a circle, like a cage. But Koetting is saying the triangle is just a landing pad.
A landing pad. So the spirit isn't being tricked into a trap? It's being given a place to stand so it can actually talk to you?
Exactly. He calls the myth of the spirit prison a misunderstanding by people who didn't actually know the entities they were calling. He says the spirit enters the triangle because it is the place designated for it to enter. It's about architecture, not incarceration.
It's much more terrifying, honestly. If the circle isn't a wall, then there's nothing stopping the entity from being everywhere at once.
But he also brings in this beautiful, almost manic detail about the mandalas. He says they have to be unique, created specifically for the entity, and this is the part that stresses me out. They have to be drawn between 1 and 12 hours before the ritual.
He's really pushing against what he calls modern practitioners who have lost all patience. He describes people rushing in, throwing a grimoire on a table, scribbling a sigil a minute before they start. He's saying that's not magic. That's just chaos.
Well, I mean, I like a bit of chaos. But I guess if you want the flesh of the gods to manifest, you can't exactly do that while you're still looking for your matches.
No, Paco, you can't. If you're rushing, you're just playing with symbols. You aren't evoking anything.
So, we talked about the tools, the hardware, as Emily puts it. But now we're getting into the actual installation process. He's talking about the labor of the mandala.
And it's more than just drawing a circle, is it? He says, what you sow, you shall reap. He's basically saying if you don't spend the hours placing candles and arranging the altar, you're just playing pretend.
Or at least you're playing pretend very poorly.
Exactly. He says the real approach is to retreat to your temple, draw the mandala, set the altar precisely in the center, and then just wait. He emphasizes the waiting. This ties back to his earlier claim about the fanatical commitment needed for preparatory work. You can't just skip the setup.
But look at what he says about the mandala itself. He's actually being quite chill here. He says it doesn't need to be some hyper-detailed masterpiece. A simple circle, maybe a meter in diameter, is fine.
Yeah, but then he starts adding these. Well, these extreme customizations.
Oh, definitely. He says you can use the names of archangels or Sephiroth on the boundary. But then, and this is where it gets wild, he suggests using natural components to make it unique to the spirit. For a demonic evocation or something destructive, he literally suggests mixing gasoline and crumbled styrofoam into a thick paste to create a fire mandala.
Gasoline and styrofoam? That's not a ritual, Seth. That's an arson attempt.
It's so visceral. But then he pivots right back to the gentle side. For harmony, love, or health, he says you should dig a shallow trench in the shape of a circle and fill it with water. Or if you're looking for prosperity or social influence, just use a ring of stones around the altar.
It's all very, elemental. It's almost like he's saying the universe is just a series of chemical reactions you can trigger if you use the right catalyst.
And he links this to the laws of the universe, being as unchangeable as gravity. He says if you try to bypass the ritual by, say, going to a church to confess or seek a connection to a planetary sphere, you're just indulging your own prejudices. He claims the principles of evocation work regardless of whether you believe in them or not.
That's a heavy claim. It's like he's saying the magic is a machine, and your faith is just interference.
But check this out. He says when you strip away the fear and doubt, the evocation becomes incredibly easy. He calls it an instrument of the gods that opens gates to their palaces.
Opens gates. Sure. Let's talk about when the gate stays shut. He spends a lot of time on the failed evocation. He says the most common sign of failure is when the neophyte starts the ritual, prepares the space, recites the incantations with all the power, and then just sits there.
And then the doubt creeps in. He says the practitioner loses patience, gets overwhelmed by doubt, and just drags themselves back home.
It sounds so much like a psychological breakdown. I'm sitting in a dark room, nothing is happening, I must be crazy.
But then he introduces this massive split in the schools of magic. This is the core of the tension. On one side, you have the practitioners of sensory magic people who have trained their clairvoyance or astral projection. They see the spirit as it forms out of the smoke of the incense.
And on the other side, he describes this much more aggressive, almost theatrical approach. He mentions people who rely on the orthodoxy of the grimoire, the idea that if you follow the instructions to the letter, the spirit must appear, regardless of your visionary abilities.
Like, I don't need to see you, I just need you to follow the contract.
Exactly. He even takes a lot of jabs at the fanatics of the Orthodox religion, the Catholics, who think you just have to use a more threatening and ultimate tone to force a spirit to appear.
But then he brings it back to that subjective synthesis idea we talked about earlier. He says if you've done the work, if you're radiating the power flowing through you, you will automatically feel the presence.
But there's a catch. He describes this sensory overload state. He says that for those who aren't highly trained in clairvoyance, the ritual triggers a storm of endorphins, dopamine, and neuropeptides.
This is where it gets intense. He says the room starts filling with smoke, voices start screaming from the darkness, shadows crawl toward the circle. The sensory input becomes so overwhelming that the practitioner is on the verge of fainting. And that is when the entity finally appears.
So the magic is basically a controlled seizure, a psychedelic trip triggered by the ritual's intensity?
It's fascinating. He's describing two different ways to reach the same door, one through refined, steady perception, and the other through a total, violent sensory overload that breaks the brain's ability to resist.
One way, you're a surgeon. The other way, you're a wrecking ball. And both end with a demon standing in your living room.
So, we talked about the heavy lifting, the sensory overload, the chemical ritual that breaks the brain. But now, Koetting moves into the aftermath, and honestly, it's kind of a warning.
A warning about what? Like, don't summon the demon because it might eat your soul?
No, even worse. He says if you actually win, if you command the spirit, and it obeys, the next few weeks are going to be extremely restless.
Restless how?
He says the money you asked for will come to you suddenly, but it'll leave you just as suddenly. One day, everyone thinks you're your best friend, and the next, you're a sore on the face of the earth. You'll experience great love and great loss.
Man, that sounds exhausting. It's like winning the lottery and having the ticket blow away in the wind 5 minutes later.
It's the cost of the extreme approach we were just talking about. You play with these massive, unstable forces, and you can't expect your bank account or your social life to stay stable.
Exactly. It's the instability of the unpredictable success. But then he shifts gears into something I find really interesting. He talks about how modern occultists have moved away from the religious intensity. He says most people prefer a scientific approach now.
Well, yeah. We like data. We like to be able to say, I did X and Y happened, without needing to fall into a state of religious ecstasy.
Right, but Koetting argues that this scientific detachment is actually a problem. He says most practitioners lack the religious fervor needed to actually trigger those chemical reactions in the brain ones that lead to the hallucinations that match the astral phenomena.
Hallucinations. See? There it is. That's the skeptic in me poking through. He's basically saying, if you aren't losing your mind, you aren't doing it right.
Hey, I've been there. Sometimes a little self-induced psychosis is exactly what the doctor ordered for a Friday night.
But look at what he says happens when you do hit that state. He says the control slips away from the magician. The descending of the Holy Spirit is so overwhelming that it prevents the ego from asserting itself. You aren't commanding a servant anymore. You're being flooded.
That's a huge contradiction to what we were saying about the architect angle. We started this episode talking about the magician as a commander, an engineer of reality. But here he's saying the successful ritual actually destroys the commander's control.
It's a paradox. You use your will to build the platform, but the goal is to let the will be overridden by the force you've summoned.
And he brings in this story to illustrate the communication problem. He tells this story about a practitioner, a gentleman, who had been doing this for 20 years who used a pendulum to talk to demons.
A pendulum? Really? That sounds like something my grandma would use to see if I'm lying about eating the last cookie.
Exactly. Koetting actually says, and I quote, "I couldn't help but roll my eyes and sigh." He compares it to using a Ouija board as a teenager.
I mean, he's not wrong. It sounds a bit amateurish for someone with 20 years of experience.
But watch how the technique works. The man draws a circle on a piece of paper, divides it into 4 parts, writes "Yes" at the top and "No" on the sides. He performs a meditation, breathes life into a sigil, and suddenly they both feel the demon crawling into the room like a fog.
That's the part that gets me. They both felt it The presence was undeniable. The hardware worked.
But the pendulum, it didn't move. Not once. The man asks the demon if it can perform the task, and the pendulum stays dead still.
Wait, so the demon was there, the energy was heavy, the fog was in the room, but the physical tool didn't react?
Right. And the man's explanation is wild. He says this is called a non-material manifestation. It didn't move physically, but if it had moved, it would have moved toward UA6. He felt the magnetism of the entire room shifting toward that UX side.
Okay, so the magic is happening, but the physics are optional? That sounds like a convenient way to claim success when your tools aren't working.
But Koetting uses this to make his main point. He says that after seeing this, he realized that relying on a pendulum is like walking with crutches when your broken leg healed years ago. He says people are so desperate for signs in cards, in smoke, in the very stars that they refuse to trust their own raw, intuitive senses.
He's saying the real secret isn't a tool at all. He says the greatest secret to communicating with spirits is simply to quiet the heart, relax the mind, and let your senses perceive what is already there.
So no pendulum, no Ouija, no scientific checking, just sitting in the dark and hoping you don't get too spooked?
He says that while that won't make the spirit visible right away, it opens the path for visions to come. He's pushing for a move away from the mechanics and back into a state of pure sensory receptivity.
It's a total abandonment of the engineer model. He wants you to stop being the architect and start being the antenna.
And that's the tension we're seeing. The book is caught between these two worlds. The ritual as a precise mechanical command, and the ritual as a way to dissolve the self so that the other can finally be heard.
I need to stretch. My neck is actually cramping from leaning in so far.
Same. Let's grab a quick water and reset.
Okay, we're back. Alright, we're back. We're diving straight into the how-to of Koetting's method, specifically this technique for summoning what he calls a wandering spirit. It's fascinating because he's moving from the heavy architectural stuff, the altars, the blades, into something much more, well, voyeuristic.
Voyeuristic is one word for it. He's basically telling you to haunt your own living room.
Hey, if a spirit wants to hang out, let him. I mean, I'm dialing in from home today, and honestly, the idea of just observing a spirit without actually demanding it do any work, that sounds a lot less stressful than my last tarot reading.
Well, look at the setup he prescribes, guys. It's so specific. He says you need an altar facing west, 2 white candles less than an inch from the edge. It's almost domestic. Like, here is your sacred temple, please don't spill your tea on it.
Exactly. And notice the distinction he makes right at the start. He says he's not summoning something in front of us, but just nearby. There's a huge difference in the mechanics there. He's not building a bridge for a heavy entity. He's just calling a neighbor to the fence.
But the fence is a state of mind. He tells you to use peripheral vision. Don't look at the flame, look at the aura of the flame. It's all about tricking the brain into dropping its guard.
That's the deactivating the brain claim from earlier, right? The part where he says the brain is the enemy.
Right. He wants you to bypass the analytical mind entirely. He literally says, do not look at the flame itself. Let your peripheral vision notice the light, the contact of the light crowns. He's trying to induce a sensory overload where the logic center just quits.
It sounds beautiful, but also kind of terrifying. He says you should feel this explosion of energy in your throat, ready to burst from your lips. Spirits, hear my voice. Spirits, come to me. It's so much pressure to be authoritative.
And then he hits you with the warning. Do not allow even the slightest seed of fear to arise. Good luck with that, Koetting. If I feel a presence in the dark, my heart is going to hammer.
Yeah, and he even acknowledges it. He says, calm your heart, as it will surely begin to beat heavily when the gaze of wandering spirits falls upon you. He's basically saying, expect to be terrified, but just pretend you're in charge.
This is where it gets wild. He claims that if you ask a question like, how tall is this spirit, your mind will give you an instant answer. But if you have to search for the answer, it's a lie.
That is such a massive, dangerous claim. If you have to look for it, it isn't true. That's a recipe for just talking to your own hallucination.
But wait, look at the mechanics he provides. He says the answer comes through the third eye via an indigo light. He's saying perceive the vibration rather than just imagine it.
But then he admits the brain might freak out. He says you might feel dizzy or like you're falling through the floor. He calls it spatial disorientation. It's like he's describing a full-on dissociative episode.
It's interesting because this ties back to his earlier claim that the ritual circle isn't a wall, but a centrifuge. He's trying to spin your consciousness so fast that the real world and the spirit world blur.
And he tells you not to close your eyes when you feel that vertigo. He says closing your eyes is a trick by your illusion-ridden brain to prevent you from seeing reality.
Ugh, man, he really hates the brain, doesn't he? The brain is a liar. The brain is a barrier. The brain is a demon.
He's certainly not a fan of the analytical faculty. But look at the end of this passage. He says the real test is asking, what does the face of the spirit look like? He says, for reasons unknown even to him or his spiritual colleagues, that this specific question requires extreme devotion and can end the session.
Because you've finally pushed too far? You've moved from observing a neighbor to staring into the abyss?
Or because once you see the face, you can't unsee it. The subjective synthesis he talked about earlier becomes too real. You're trapped in its image. In a room with a spirit.
I think I'll stick to the Munchkin games for tonight. At least when a dragon attacks, I know it's just plastic.
Okay, let's pick up right where that tension was building. He's talking about the moment the image of the face breaks. He says sometimes it hits you like a flash, and it might be, well, threatening or ugly.
And there it is, the moment you lose control of your emotions.
Exactly, but then he gives this weirdly specific instruction. He says if the face looks pleasant, the moment you try to analyze it, your brain kills the whole process. It becomes an enemy to your magic.
It's that same cycle, isn't it? The second you try to turn it into a thing to be studied, the magic evaporates.
Right, so he says, avoid attention to details, just perceive the image as a whole. He wants you to treat the spirit's body as something ephemeral, something that doesn't even fit into our expectations of reality.
He's basically saying, stop being a scientist for 5 minutes and just see.
Yeah, but look at what he does next. He tells you to take that image you perceived and project it back onto the spirit out into the real world.
Wait, what? You don't just look at it, you have to throw the image back out?
Yeah, he says you have to move your focus away from yourself. He says if you focus on the image, the focus is actually shifted from the spirit back to you, to your distorted imagination and egotistical pride.
There's that ego talk again. He's obsessed with the idea that our very perception is a selfish act.
But he claims if you move the focus back to where you first found the spirit, you can move past just knowing it's there to actually seeing it standing before you. And here's the wild part. He says the spirit will actually freeze in time and space just so you can examine it.
Like a photograph?
Exactly. He says time and space aren't fixed phenomena here. They're just creations of the mind that are sometimes useful and sometimes just in the way.
Man, I wish my brain worked like that when I'm stuck in traffic. Just freeze the car so I can look at the...
But he's not talking about traffic, Paco. He's saying the spirit is real, and the image you're seeing isn't just a hallucination in your head, but exists in the outer world.
But then he gets into the actual communication. He says you can ask anything. What is the spirit wearing? And the image just appears.
But there's a heavy way to end the exercise. He says we have enough power in your chest, let it burst out and command. Spirit, what can you say to me?
And then comes the part that sounds like a migraine.
He says at first, the voice might sound distorted, meaningless. He says you'll feel this pressure building around your head, especially around your ears.
That sounds so visceral, like your brain is literally being squeezed by the sound.
He says the words will hang in the air around you. And he gives this incredibly specific tip. You have to relax your neck, your forehead, your eyes, your brows, basically your whole face. So you can ask yourself, what did the spirit say?
I can already feel my forehead tightening just listening to this.
It's the delay that gets me. He says the hardest part is hearing the voice in real time. He says often the spirit's lips move, and only seconds later, the word hits your mind.
But then, and this is the pro tip, he says, as you get better, the reverse happens. The words hit your consciousness first, and then the lips move.
That's a massive claim. He's saying the latency of your own perception is the only thing separating you from the real experience.
And he ends this section with what he calls field testing. He says, don't do this in a chair you brought with you. He says we have to go into the wild, sit on hard earth or a stone, and repeat the whole thing.
Because if you can do it when you're uncomfortable, in the dirt, then you've actually mastered the mechanics.
So, basically, if you want to talk to ghosts, you need to go camping and sit on a rock. Got it.
But wait, there's a massive pivot here. He shifts from the how-to to a critique of Ulcer books. He says most authors of grimoires try to make things as confusing as possible.
Because confusion sells books. Seth. Complexity looks like death to a beginner.
He agrees. He says they trap themselves in stereotypes of good and evil, logic, and absurdity. He claims that evocation is actually strikingly simple if you follow the basic principles.
See? This is exactly what I told you about my Munchkin tactics. It's not chaos, it's just efficient.
But look at his sting here. He says neophytes fail because they enter the temple expecting failure. He says when people tell him I tried evocation and it failed, his first question is always, why?
And I bet the answer is because I didn't see a guy in a cape appear in my kitchen.
Exactly. He says the spirit might have been there, just waiting for the practitioner to materialize them. He says the spirits, demons, and angels exist independently of us. They respond to the elementary principles even if you stop reading the incantation halfway through because you're too disappointed.
That is such a heavy burden for a practitioner. To think that the failure isn't the magic, but your own lack of... stamina?
He calls it a lack of persistence and confidence. He even claims that when people call an evocation a failure, they often experience supernatural coincidences shortly after.
You mean like, the demon doesn't show up in the triangle, but it shows up in your bank account or your marriage?
Exactly. He says they find other ways to affect the lives of those who called them, often forcing the person to run to him for quick salvation.
So, if you mess up the ritual, the demon doesn't go away. It just switches from visual hallucination to life-ruining nightmare.
He basically says the only way to stop the chaos is to be certain of the success from the very moment you decide to perform the evocation. We're moving into a very practical, almost housekeeping phase of the book now. He's finishing up that thought on the wandering spirits. He says you can enough never leave a ritual unfinished. If you don't see the spirit, don't just quit. Reconsecrate the sigil, refocus, and try again.
That sounds incredibly exhausting. Imagine being halfway through a summoning. You're sweating, your heart is pounding, and you're just like, well, I guess I'll just do a do-over.
I mean, if the demon is already half materialized, leaving him there sounds like a terrible idea. Like leaving a half-cooked steak on the counter. It's just going to go bad and haunt your fridge.
Exactly. He says if you don't see them, you have to refocus your will. But then he pivots to what he calls the subtle science, the preparation of the temple. And he's very strict about the timing. You start no earlier than 12, and no later than an hour before the start.
It's all about that intentionality, right? Creating a sacred window of time.
Yeah, but look at his take on the temple itself. He says if it's indoors, clean it. If it's outdoors, clear the trash and stones. But then he shares this anecdote. He tells this story about a very friend of his who cleans her house perfectly for her parents, but when it's time for a ritual, she just sweeps everything on the floor to the side to make room for the triangle.
Honestly, relatable. Why bother with a vacuum when you have a Koetting king coming? Just move the laundry piles.
Hey, as long as the king doesn't trip over a rogue sock, I'm fine with it.
But it leads into the actual geometry. This is where the architect part of our theme really hits. He's prescribing a specific layout, a mandala at least a meter in diameter, and an isosceles triangle outside the circle with its apex touching the boundary.
And it's not random placement. Healy links the triangle's position to the cardinal directions. North for earth, east for air. He even gives a whole chart for which direction corresponds to which element and which planetary sphere.
It's very Solomonic, very structured. It's that mechanics of command we were talking about. You're just asking a spirit to show up. You're building a specific direction-y trap.
And he ties it to the spirits themselves. Archangels like Raphael or Michael have their specific sides. He even says if you want to call elemental spirits, you have to stand facing the direction of their element.
Wait, look at what he says about the incense. This is the part that always gets me. He says, do not succumb to the temptation of buying those tiny charcoal tablets from the local occult shop.
Oh boy, here we go.
He says they're too small, they burn too fast, and they don't provide enough heat to burn the necessary amount of incense. He's basically calling out every beginner's kit on the market.
He's being a bit of a snob here, but he has a very point. He says the incense isn't for the smell, it's for the smoke. He offers two theories for why the smoke matters. 1, it provides a thick, pliable substance for the spirit to form a body. 2, it causes a type of asphyxiation that triggers an endorphin and dopamine release in a practitioner, causing hallucinations.
So it's either magical medium or intentional oxygen deprivation. Either way, it's pretty intense.
And then he gets really dark. He mentions that in extreme and demonic versions of evocation, warmed vessels of fresh blood are used. He says it's often more successful than just smoke.
Okay, that is definitely not low energy vibes.
I mean, I'm all for a good steak, but fresh blood in the triangle? That's a bit much for a Tuesday night, isn't it?
He doesn't even try to debunk it. He just asks if theories of the practitioners, whether it's ectoplasm or the psychological terror of seeing blood, actually matter if the result is the same. He's very much in that results-oriented mindset we discussed earlier.
It's that subjective synthesis again. If the ritual makes you believe it's happening, then for you, it is happening.
Right. But then he gets back to the practical tools. He says the brazier's function is actually more physical than spiritual. It's just there so you don't burn the temple down. And he warns, make sure you have enough incense, otherwise they might run out when the demon is halfway materialized.
Imagine the disappointment. The demon is halfway there, the smoke clears, and you're just standing there with a burnt piece of sandalwood.
He goes through the list: sandalwood for elementals, frankincense for Raphael, and then dragon's blood for the lower Goteca spirits. He even suggests burning dried human hair for truly demonic entities.
Okay, I think I've had enough extreme for one episode.
Same. Let's get back to the altar setup. He says the altar must be in the exact center of the circle. 2 candles, either black or white. No multicolored ones because they're too distracting.
He's very focused on minimizing distractions to keep that subjectly synthesis intact. The bowl for the liquid wine, honey, or blood goes on the left. The ritual dagger, the athame, goes on the right, pointing toward the triangle. And you even need a notebook to record everything.
It's so much work. It's a full-scale production, more than just a meditation.
And the very last thing he mentions for the setup, the sigil. It goes on the altar last, face down on a square of paper.
So, you build the space, you prepare the tools, you set the directions, you prep the smoke, and finally, you lay down the address for the entity. It's like setting the stage before the actor even arrives. I think my brain needs a minute to process all that stagecraft.
Agreed. Let's take a quick breather and grab some water. All right, we're back. We are diving straight into the guts of Koetting's manual today. We're looking at the mechanics of the architect, how a practitioner actually builds the stage for a spirit to stand on.
And it is intense. I've been reading the lead up to this section, and he's already being so provocative. He's basically calling out anyone who thinks ritual is just about superstitions or scaring entities with divine authority.
He's definitely throwing shade at the old school grimoire crowd. He's saying, look, if you just want to burn incense, use a piece of wood, don't pretend it's high magic.
He's dismissing the whole idea of subduing a spirit through fear. He's saying the entity's job is to perform, and your job is to provide the platform. It's a very modern, almost corporate way of looking at a demon.
But look how he transitions into the actual work. He says you have to return to the temple and consecrate everything. And he makes this specific claim, and I want to flag this, that consecrating tools during a specific ritual is way more effective than doing it in some random, aimless ceremony earlier.
Right. He's saying the energy needs to be tied to the intent. It's about saturating the physical material with a very specific, tangible, spiritual energy.
It reminds me of when I was setting up for my set the other night. If I just walk on stage with a mic, it's a mic. But if I spend the whole night building this specific tension, the mic becomes part of the vibe, you know?
Paco, your vibe is usually just loud feedback.
Hey, that was a sonic manifestation.
But seriously, look at his metaphor for the tool. He uses a hammer. He says if you buy a hammer, believe it's a hammer, and imagine the houses you'll build, but you never actually hit a nail. It's just a piece of iron on a stick.
That's the architect angle right there. The tool only becomes a tool when it's used for its purpose. This echoes his earlier point about subjective synthesis. You can't just read the manual. You have to inhabit the function of the object.
It's so visceral. He describes this process of the invocation of omnipotence. He tells you to stand at the altar, palms down, and feel this electrical discharge. He says you should feel your very muscles and flesh dissecting or layering as this unearthly force passes through you.
It sounds exhausting. He's describing a complete physiological overload. He's basically saying you need to turn your body into a fountain of power.
But look at the instruction for the altar. He tells you to visualize the light from your hands infusing the stone or wood, making the molecules vibrate. He says the goal is for the object to become more than just a physical object, but also not purely spiritual. It's the union of the high and the low.
I love that part. The idea that the object becomes a foundation upon which my own universe arises. It's so much more expansive than just blessing a table.
But here's the kicker, the part where he gets really black magic with it. He says when you draw the triangle for the spirit to appear, you shouldn't just draw lines. You have to visualize them as lines of fire.
And then he tells you how to set the vibe for the entity itself using the direction of your movement.
Yeah, if you want an angel or something altruistic, you trace the circle clockwise. But if you want the demonic male or destructive types, you go counterclockwise. You're literally drawing an astral perimeter of blue fire.
It's a stark distinction. It brings us back to his claim that the practitioner's level of expectation and authority is what dictates reality. You aren't just drawing a circle, you are defining the boundaries of what is allowed to exist within that space.
It's heavy. He's moving from the internal, the energy in your own chest, to this massive external flaming geometry.
It's all very command and control. He's building a prison of light and fire and then inviting a demon to sit in the middle of it. I just wonder, if the tools are so saturated with your power, what happens when you're done?
Well, he does say the power stays in the tools long after they crumble to dust. But that's a conversation for the next chunk. Okay, let's get into the actual sequence. He's moving from the setup to the moment of seeing. He tells the practitioner to look at the tools, the altar, the bowl, the dagger in the hold, how they shine with the life you've given them.
It's so intensely focused on that feedback loop. You aren't just using a bowl. You're looking at it and seeing the glow of life that you provided. It's like he's saying, don't just pray to a dead object, witness your own impact on the material world.
Yeah, until you realize he wants you to feel like a million suns are exploding inside your chest. I mean, I like a bit of drama, but it's a lot of pressure on the plummet.
It's more than drama, Paco. Look at the mechanics. He has you take the chalice in your left hand, hold it, and then, and this is the part that always gets me, he tells you to gather all this almighty power in your torso and then push it through your fingers into the wine.
He actually describes it as this physical sensation of the power threatening to tear the flesh and bursting through the fingers like a river into the bowl.
That sounds terrifying. Like you're literally trying to channel a flood through your fingertips.
It's classic architect stuff. He's trying to bridge the gap between a metaphor and a physical sensation. He wants you to feel the heat, the weight, the actual pressure of the energy. And then once the wine is charged, you say this whole thing about it being the elixir of immortality and God's blood that cleanses the soul.
Wait, God's blood? That's a pretty heavy way to describe a glass of Cabernet.
It's heavy, but look at the reason he's doing it. He explicitly says the primary function is to charge the tools, but the secondary hidden function, and this is the core of our whole episode, is to achieve a state of omnipotence.
Right. He says it in this brief window. While you're drawing the flames and charging the liquid, you aren't just a person anymore. You stop being this human being full of doubts, and you stand before the altar as a deity.
See, that's where I start to get skeptical. He's talking about this massive psychological shift, but he's doing it through very specific, almost scripted physical actions. He's trying to bypass the ego by overwhelming the senses.
But look at how he handles the command part. This is the most interesting part of the whole passage to me. He says most beginners fail because they try to command the spirit directly. They think, hey demon, show up. And he says, no, don't be a dilettante.
Yeah, he's calling them limiters. He says a spirit might refuse if you just bark orders at it.
Exactly. He says you should command the universe and the temple to manifest the spirit. You tell the universe, let the spirit be seen by my eyes. Let its power become my power. You're not negotiating with a demon. You're instructing reality to act as the stage for its arrival.
It's a much more stable way of looking at it. It's not a confrontation. It's an architectural instruction. I have built this temple. I have charged this space. Therefore, the entity must appear because the conditions for its existence have been met.
But then he hits you with a physical fallout. He says, look out, you're probably going to feel dizzy, weak, and exhausted.
Oh man, the magical fatigue. I feel it after a long set of stand-up, but he's saying it's actually a good sign.
He insists on it. He says this smootle fatigue is actually a sign of the approaching materialization. He calls it ecstasy rather than weakness. He's saying your human body is literally buckling under the weight of the unearthly forces trying to enter the room.
It's like the system is overloading the circuit breaker. Your physical body is the breaker, and when it starts to flicker and fail, it means the current is finally flowing.
It sounds like a recipe for a blackout. He literally says you might lose consciousness, and you have to balance on a thin line between losing consciousness and maintaining control.
True, but it brings us back to the whole theme. The architect provides the structure, but the reality that fills it. That's a much more volatile thing than we'd like to admit.
But there's a purpose to the struggle. He ends this section with this intense instruction. Lift the chalice to your forehead, Drink the blood of God, and use the smoke of the incense to blur your vision. He tells you to look through the sigil, not at it.
To find the connection between your mind and the spirit's mind, which is already there, waiting to be called.
It's a beautiful, terrifying loop. You build the stage, you charge the tools, you transform yourself into a god, and then you sit in the dark, staring through a piece of paper, waiting for a shadow to move.
And the most haunting part? He says that before anything can actually succeed, it must first arise in the mind. The architecture is all there. We're just waiting for the inhabitant to move in. Okay, we are moving into the most critical phase, the transition from the setup to the actual event. He's talking about the moment you stop looking at the paper and start looking through it.
And he's so specific about the mental state here. He says you have to take that goal, the reason you're even doing this, and turn it into a clear, unified visual image. A single cohesive picture instead of a random list of wishes.
Good luck with that. Most people can't even focus on a grocery list for 10 minutes without checking their phone.
But look at what he says happens once you achieve that focus. He says the transfer of energy from your mind into the sigil must become automatic. You aren't pushing the energy. You're just letting it leak out.
And then, wait. This is wild, he says. The first sign that you've actually made a connection is that the sigil starts to disappear.
What? Like the ink just evaporates?
No, not the ink. He says parts of the lines, or even the outer circle, will vanish from your field of vision and then reappear a few seconds later. But when they come back, they don't look like they're drawn on the paper anymore. They look like they're hovering in the air above it.
That is a massive red flag for me. That sounds like a classic optical illusion. Your eyes are tired. You're staring at a single point and your brain starts playing tricks with light and shadow.
But he anticipates that. He says you must not focus your eyes on the part that disappeared. You have to keep a diffuse gaze on the whole sigil. He claims that if you follow this, the rest of the lines will undergo the same metamorphosis, vibrating with life.
So it's like the paper is turning into a 3D hologram. That would be a hell of a way to start a magic show.
He's describing a total shift in the environment. He says for those with a natural gift, they might hear a voice or see the room change, getting darker or warmer, or even a different color.
And then we get to the part where he says, don't get cocky. He warns that even if you see these things, you shouldn't assume the spirit is fully here. You can't claim victory until you see it in the triangle and hear its voice in the temple.
It's like he's setting a trap for your own ego. Don't think it's done until it's done.
Speaking of things being done, I think we need to talk about the Wisconsin incident. This is where the book gets very unfiltered.
Oh man, this is the part where the architect meets a very angry neighbor.
He's in this house in Wisconsin 2002, trying to teach a student. He's got his temple set up upstairs. He's doing the whole ritual, the incense, the sigil, the big heavy incantations. Everything is going according to plan.
Until the wife downstairs starts screaming.
Exactly. He describes it perfectly. He's trying to be quiet, but suddenly he hears this woman screaming. Damn it, stop it, from the floor below.
And it's not even a sply scream. It's a you're ruining my sleep scream.
She's literally coming up the stairs, pounding on the door, face all red, yelling at him because he's thumping on the floor and turning on all the lights.
And the funniest part is that he's sitting there completely stunned because he knows he wasn't making any noise. He was being as careful as possible.
This is the crux of the debate he's highlighting. He's presenting two camps of modern occultists. One side says, look, the spirit is just communicating through your imagination. It's all psychological.
And the other side says, no, the spirit is actually manifesting, and it's causing physical chaos, loud bangs, flashes of light, things breaking.
And Koetting is basically saying, well, I was in that house, and I didn't hear any banging. I just heard a very annoyed woman.
Which, honestly, sounds much more realistic.
But look at his conclusion. He says that because of that incident, he moved his temple to a cave in a mountainside. He says now, when he performs an evocation, the wind might howl or thunder might roll, but he only sees the spirit. No more angry neighbors.
He's saying the materialization is real, but the side effects are what people get wrong. He's trying to separate the actual presence of the entity from the Hollywood version of explosions and chaos.
I don't know. If I were the student in that house and I saw the walls vibrating while the teacher was yelling at a lady about her sleep schedule, I'd probably be running for the hills.
True, but it brings us back to the whole theme. The architect provides the structure, but the reality that fills it. That's a much more volatile thing than we'd like to admit. Let's take a breather before we dive too deep into the structural chaos.
Good idea, because your structural lecture was starting to sound suspiciously like a textbook professor.
Oh, is that right? And I suppose your spontaneous method is just waiting for a cosmic punchline?
All right, let's get back to it.
All right, we are back. We're moving past the chaos of the Wisconsin incident and getting into the meat of the text. Today, we're looking at the mechanics of command. Is the magician an architect of reality or just a witness to something they can't control?
I'm still feeling that energy from our session yesterday, but let's dive in. We're looking at Koetting's Evoking Eternity.
And I'm dialing in from the home studio, feeling much better now that my jaw isn't trying to exit my face. Rather see if Koetting actually knows how to boss these entities around.
Or if he's just making it up as he goes. Let's see the text.
Okay, look at this opening. He's talking about people who do rituals just to see what happens, thinking they have no control, that the spirit is in charge. But then he pivots. He says there's a group of practitioners, the scientific ones, who enter the temple with firm confidence in a single inevitable outcome.
It's such a bold claim. He's describing this almost clinical approach to the supernatural. Like if you follow the recipe, the cake must manifest.
Spoken like someone who hasn't had a ritual go sideways.
But wait, look how he describes the actual experience. He says even if you hear knocking in the walls, see flashes of light, or the incense smoke starts thickening and curdling in the center of the triangle, you have to stay focused. You can't let the sensory noise distract you from the goal.
That's intense. It's like he's saying, ignore the explosions, focus on the smoke.
It reminds me of what we were discussing with the tension between command and surrender. He says, don't try to force the spirit with thoughts or emotions. Instead, release your desires and doubts.
Right, this is the pivot point. He's saying, don't use your ego to push, use yourself to pull. He calls it directing intention from the depths of the eye, where the one true God lives. He's aiming for the state of ecstasy that turns into a violent storm of will, yet you keep this undeniable sense of self-control.
It sounds exhausting. Be a hurricane, but stay perfectly still.
Sounds like my last Munchkin game, honestly. Absolute chaos, but I'm pretending I'm a grand strategist.
But look at the actual incantation he provides. It's so direct. He literally writes out, I call you. I give you permission to appear. I give you the power to manifest. Appear.
And then he says the materialization starts, but it's not instant. He describes the physical environment changing, the air getting denser, lights flickering. And then he gives this warning, do not attempt to analyze this vision. He says, do not let your brain interpret the image, just see, hear, and accept the power and majesty.
That is a massive red flag for me.
Why?
Because not analyzing is how you end up talking to a hallucination and thinking it's a deity. If you turn off the critical faculty, you're just a passenger in your own head.
But Jane, he's tying this back to his earlier claim about subjective synthesis. He argues that to see the spirit, you have to reach a state where the spirit's reality is as real as the physical one. You have to bypass the analytical mind to achieve that subjective synthesis.
But check this out. He says the spirits might not even be polite. He says they rarely respond to a hello and might just stay silent or make a bunch of noise. He tells you to just get to the point, my will is this, I desire.
The spirits already know why you called them. They're just waiting for permission to do the job. That's a heavy thought. It strips away the drama and makes it purely about the execution of will.
It's very architect mode. No room for hesitation, no room for shame, guilt, or uncertainty. He says the temple is the place to proclaim your innate right to be a god in your world.
Talk about hyper-individualism. It's a bit much, isn't it? I am a god, now go fetch my coffee, spirit.
Hey, if the spirit is willing, why not? But okay, he does tell a story where it goes wrong. He mentions a time a planetary spirit refused to leave. Just stood there in the triangle with a childlike smirk on its face.
That's terrifying. He says he was paralyzed with fear, not knowing if the spirit would stay forever and cause harm. He had to scramble through a grimoire just to find an exorcism formula to get rid of it.
So the command isn't absolute? That contradicts the whole mastery thing he was preaching a few pages ago.
It does. It shows the crack in the armor. He's presenting this image of a master architect, but in practice, he's a practitioner who got caught off guard by a mischievous entity.
And then he ends the whole thing by saying, by the end of a successful ritual, you should feel a deadly fatigue for several days straight.
Well, at least he's honest about the burnout.
It's a heavy price for divine power. We'll leave it there for today. Next time, we'll see if that deadly fatigue is a sign of success, or just the cost of playing with fire. Okay, we're moving into the aftermath now. The ritual is over, the entities have been summoned. But Koetting turns to the post-op care, and he has this very specific, almost biological instruction. He says, for safety, it's better to satisfy your hunger first and then surrender to sleep.
Wait, why? For safety? Is there a risk of, what, snacking on a demon?
Not quite. He says if you go straight to sleep while still in that divine state, your mind won't transition back to the mundane world properly. It'll just drift from the spirit's face and voice straight into a dream state. He actually warns against reading books or watching TV to wind down, because those things can just pull you back into dreaming of the spirit.
That sounds incredibly easy to do. I mean, look at me. I've spent the last 3 days staring at a jammed door. I'm basically in a trance already.
He suggests something much more grounded. He says, I've always preferred to immediately find myself in the company of living people after I have interacted with immortal entities. He says it creates a perfect balance.
Balance? But Moke, if I just spent 2 hours commanding a legion of shadows, the last thing I want is to go to a crowded pub and try to talk about the weather. I'd be looking at everyone's neck, thinking about, well, you know.
And that brings us to his most unsettling claim. He says if you start feeling like the evocation happened in a dream or even in a past life, that's actually the proof that your mind has returned to normal.
That is a classic gaslighting technique. If you don't remember it, it worked perfectly.
But then, Paco, look what happens when the work becomes a habit. He admits that for a long time he worked only with demons. And because he was constantly in their company, he says he became demonic himself.
How does he describe that?
He says his thoughts and actions became much darker, much more sinister. He claims he became as vicious as a real criminal and started viewing humanity as a herd that should be replaced from the face of the earth by a more perfected species, us.
Okay, so we're talking about more than work-life balance issues. We're talking about a full-on personality overhaul. He's basically saying, hang out with enough demons and you'll eventually start craving the apocalypse.
It's the you are what you eat role, but with cosmic horror.
But he calls it demonic obsession. He's saying the practitioner absorbs the energies, the thoughts, even the familiar spirits of the entities they call. It's like an infection.
Exactly. And he admits that even Catholic exorcists would call him completely possessed.
I'll stick to my tarot cards and my Munchkin games, thanks. I don't need my personality to turn into a villain arc.
But look at the flip side. He says there is a middle path. He claims you can descend into the depths of evil and darkness to the point of total oblivion, just so you can later ascend to heights that even the angels envy.
It's so dramatic. It's like he's describing a spiritual bungee jump. But then he drops this massive bombshell. There is only one being in the whole universe capable of revealing your destiny. And that being is yourself.
He's trying to claw back some agency here. He's saying, don't trust anyone else with your fate. Even while he's talking about all this terrifying transformation, he's insisting that you have to take absolute responsibility for which entities you choose to ally with.
He's saying you can go to hell, but make sure you chose the right direction on the map.
Precisely. And he claims that by constantly surrounding yourself with the qualities of the spirits you call, you gradually absorb more virtues. You're essentially trying to sculpt your soul by using these entities as templates.
Which brings us back to the architect idea. But it's a dangerous architecture. You're building a temple, but you're using the entities as the bricks. What happens when the bricks start building? You?
That's the question, and he even pulls in the Abramlin text to add a layer of practical reality. He mentions that the author of Abramlin warns that you can't do this work if you're too tied to obligations, like having a wife, children, or even being a house servant to a master. You need solitude and resources.
I mean, I'm currently dialing in from my house, so I've got the solitude part down. But resources? My bank account is currently more impoverished peasant than magical emperor.
And Koetting calls out people who use that as an excuse. He says he's heard a chorus of complaints from students. I can't make more money. I don't have enough free time. I need a miracle to afford the time to do the work.
Ah, yes. The I'm too busy with my 9 to 5 to become a god defense. Very relatable.
He calls them wonderful excuses. He says the point is, you can command the spirits to manifest, you can command them to do your will, and you can command them to fulfill your tasks. The problem isn't the magic. The problem is that you're too distracted by your worldly obligations to actually use the power you've supposedly mastered.
So it's a catch-22. You call the spirits to change your reality, but you can't focus on the ritual because your reality is too messy.
And if you do succeed, he says, the end result is a mirror. You look into the ritual space and you see a god looking back at you.
A god who probably needs a very long nap and a very large steak.
Or a god who's just realized he's accidentally become a criminal.
We'll leave it there. Next time, we'll look at the tools themselves, the actual hardware of the ritual.
I think I need a coffee before my brain completely melts from all this heavy lifting.
Agreed. Let's take a quick breather and come back to the hardware. All right, let's dive back in. So, we're diving back into Koetting's Evoking Eternity. We've been talking about this idea, the architect, the magician who doesn't just pray, but builds a reality.
And today it gets, well, a little bit aggressive.
Aggressive is one word for it. Arrogant is another.
Hey, I heard arrogance. You guys better not be talking about my tarot reading from last night.
No, Paco. We're looking at the text. We're right at the part where Koetting is justifying why a magician shouldn't be stuck in a dead-end job.
Oh man, I feel that. I'm literally sitting here in my pajamas. If I were an architect of reality, I'd build a palace with a built-in snack bar.
See? That's the problem. Koetting says, and I quote that, "It's not strange that someone who can achieve omnipotence is stuck working for $8 an hour in a fast food joint." He says that job might have some vague meaning for a society that's basically drugged on neon lights, but for us, we demand more.
It's so intense. It's that classic us versus them mentality. He's basically saying that if you're just sorting vegetables or stocking shelves, you're just part of the distraction.
But look at his pivot, though. He's talking about more than being better than people. He's talking about freedom. He says, it's not about the money, it's about the freedom. He argues that the less you're paid, the more is demanded of you. If you quit, how fast can your boss replace you?
Exactly. He's framing the mundane struggle as a lack of spiritual authority. He says if you wanted more time, more life, you could have it if you were brave enough to rise in full stature among the shadows of creation and issue your commands.
That sounds incredibly lonely. Like, you can't even have a normal relationship with the world because you're too busy commanding it.
I mean, if I could command my laundry to fold itself, I'd be a god, no question.
But wait, he actually tries to ground this in something academic here. He brings up Abraham Maslow. He's talking about the hierarchy of needs.
Right. He's saying that once you satisfy the base stuff, food, sleep, hygiene, you move up towards self-actualization, and he equates that with spiritual ascension.
But he's doing something sneaky there. He's using Maslow to justify a massive leap. He says the magician reaches a point where they don't care about the flesh anymore. Their work is to find their place in eternity.
But then, look at the contradiction. This is where I get stuck. He says you have enough to ensure your basic earthly needs are met before you can erect your throne above God's stars. He literally says evocation can be used for financial stability and improving health.
So he's promising us we can be gods, but only if we use the magic to make sure our bank accounts are full first? That feels incredibly transactional.
It's like he's saying, get your life together so you can properly manifest a demon.
I mean, it's hard to focus on the eternal source when you're hungry, right?
Exactly. He described the universe as this massive, complex machine built by a perpetual creative force. He says the waves of creation get denser as they move away from the source, eventually forming the material plane.
And he says we have this spark of the source inside us, that we have the capacity to eventually know the higher levels.
But he adds this heavy layer of, well, determinism. He says the lower levels are stuck in their nature, but humans, we can evolve. We can become masters. He says that as the god within you wakes up, the elements of the earth will obey you. Blood will boil and bubble at your command. He's basically saying that if you're powerful enough, good and evil are just human delusions. He claims the eternal source doesn't care about morality. It doesn't feel guilt when its blue flame destroys everything.
That's a massive claim. He's stripping away the entire ethical framework of most religions. He says angels and demons are essentially the enough because their purpose is identical. They are just different methods of the absolute expressing itself.
That is a terrifying thought. If there's no moral distinction, then there's no protection. It's just power.
It sounds like a recipe for a very bad Tuesday.
And he closes this section by addressing the ego problem. He says people will call this unjustified egocentrism, but he argues the only reason a demon or an angel won't obey you is because you don't recognize your own authority.
Right. It's not that the demon is being difficult, it's that you're not commanding hard enough.
It's the way to avoid accountability. If the ritual fails, it's your lack of self-authority, not the technique.
It's a closed loop, a perfect, unbreakable logic. We'll pick this up next time when we look at the divine helpers, the angels, and see if they're actually any more moral than the demons he just described. All right, let's get into it. We've just come off that heavy section about the lack of morality in the absolute. Now, Koetting pivots. He moves from the chaos of the universe to what he calls the necessity of angels.
And he starts with a warning. He says, the condition you must fulfill when working with them is that you must convince them that a genuine necessity for such intervention has arisen. And then he gets real, and it is very difficult to lie to them.
Well, yeah. If you're calling in a cosmic entity to fix your credit score, you can't exactly pretend it's a spiritual emergency. They're going to see right through that.
But look at how he justifies the low-level stuff. He says most Sephirotic angels are experts in, well, the mundane. Improving finances, healing loved ones, helping with business, or even the arts.
He's basically saying they're cosmic consultants.
Exactly. And he even says they have abilities that have no direct relation to spiritual development.
Which brings us back to that weird contradiction from earlier. He says the goal is ascension, but then he says, hey, if you want more money, call an angel. It's like he's saying the path to the stars is paved with paid invoices.
Hey, if an angel can drop $1,000 on my doorstep in a few hours, I don't care if it's spiritual or not. I'll take the check.
See, Paco, you're hitting on Koetting's point. He says every action is a step toward ascension. He literally says reading a tabloid or even recovering from an addiction, which he calls spiritual slavery, is part of the process. He claims that by overcoming the pathologies of the world, you learn more about yourself than you ever could in a vacuum.
I like that part, actually. The idea that even the messiness of being human, the struggle with addiction, or even politics, is part of the training. It's not just about sitting in a quiet room, it's about the friction of life.
Sure, but then he goes into the master mode again. He says a magician can move a mountain just by commanding it. A mountain may crumble to dust over thousands of years. But when the master commands it, move to that side, the mountain will move.
That is such a massive, heavy-handed metaphor. It's so, look at me, I'm powerful.
It's definitely not subtle, but he ties it to the angels. He says working with them is the most obvious sign of this unstoppable movement toward ascension. He says they bring such divine grace that your path is lit with highest light.
And then he gets specific. He says archangels aren't just about the cosmic stuff. They help with your highest spiritual potential. He gives the example of Raphael. If you're sick, you call him. And not only does your body heal, but your emotional and psychological damage is repaired too.
It's a very holistic view. He's saying the physical, the mental, and the spiritual are all one interconnected web.
But he also introduces a very strict, almost tutorial-style approach. He provides a list, a specific sequence. He says if you follow this order from the first angel to the last, you'll open new doors of perception.
Here we go. The step-by-step guide to becoming a deity.
Let's look at the first one, Sigil Deldala. He describes him as being so engulfed in light that you can barely see his shape. His voice doesn't even come from his mouth. It comes from the light itself.
That sounds beautiful. He says when he performs a certain gesture, you should accept his light as a bright mantle or a shroud that moves from him to you.
And the purpose? To increase your energetic vibrations and prepare your aura for the ascent. It's like a cosmic warm-up.
Okay, so step 1, get a glow up.
Then we move to Sigil Cicados. This one is much more grounded. He appears as a strong young man in the center of a whirlwind. He's there to remove all obstacles and cleanse your life of chaos.
I love the advice he gives for this one. He says, discuss with him all the obstacles that might hinder your development. You actually have to talk to the entity about your problems.
But look at the kicker at the end of that section. He says, sometimes the prayer, Lord, teach me humility, is less effective than, Lord, I'll handle it myself.
Now, that is a 100% true statement.
It's a very proactive brand of spirituality. It ties back to what we said earlier about the magician as architect. It's not about begging for mercy. It's about taking the reins.
But it's still so much about control, even with Raziel, the third angel. He's this massive, overwhelming presence, the silent witness to creation and destruction. He knows the word that created the universe.
And the instructions for Raziel are intense. You have to call him 4 times. Each time you ask for something different secrets, familiars, signs in your daily life.
And the 4th time you ask him to speak the word. A word so powerful that just thinking it can make galaxies shift.
I mean, if I had a word that could move galaxies, I wouldn't be using it to find my car keys.
But it's the culmination of the sequence. It leads to the final angel in this chunk, Sigil Derdukia. She's described as the adoptive mother of all humanity, made of divine love. Her skin is porcelain white, and she's basically carrying the weight of the world's sins so we can ascend.
It's a much softer image compared to the whirlwind of Cicados or the terrifying power of Raziel. She's the mercy in the system.
But even she has a job. She's there to soften hearts of stone and lead the mage toward the face of God.
So we have this progression. From a shroud of light to a whirlwind of cleaning, to the terrifying secrets of the universe, and finally to the maternal mercy of the divine. It's a complete cycle of, well, whatever Koetting thinks ascension is.
It's a cycle of taking the chaos of the self and trying to structure it into something divine.
Or just trying to find a way to make the universe obey your specific set of needs. My brain is officially fried from all these cosmic hierarchies.
Fair enough. Let's take 5 and grab some water.
Okay, we're back.
Okay, we're moving into the heavy hitters now. We just finished looking at the light side of the hierarchy. The Koetting is pivoting. He's shifting from the angelic mechanics to what he calls demonic ascension.
And wow, he does not go easy on the human ego here. He starts by basically saying our immoral spirits are fine, but our animal shells are too busy feeling guilty to actually do anything.
Typical. He's basically saying, stop being a moral person, it's getting in the way of your magic.
I mean, he's not wrong about the guilt, though. But look at how he frames this figure to Riaya. He says this entity can just wash away your sins whether you killed someone or just stole candy. It's like a spiritual reset button.
It's interesting because he ties this directly to the idea of subjective synthesis we talked about earlier. He wants you to believe the guilt is just a biological glitched chain from the past that prevents you from reaching that limitless purity.
But then he immediately jumps to Metatron, and the description: a face that looks young and energetic, yet ancient and full of wisdom. It's such a classic archetype. And he claims that after you evoke him, you'll start seeing these coincidences, like suddenly getting invited to the right esoteric circles.
Coincidences. Right, because nothing ever happens by accident in a ritual exactly. He's basically promising a cosmic networking event.
Hey, if an angel can get me a VIP pass to a secret society, I'm calling him. But look at Enki-Dora. That's intense. He's unusually large. His voice sounds like claps of thunder coming from the sky, not his mouth.
And he adds this specific rule. You cannot call Enki-Dora until you've called the previous 5 angels. It's a strict, programmed sequence. It goes back to his claim that the practitioner needs a proven working ritual system, rather than just whim.
And here comes the real hook. He says the modern magician is a coward, that we're all just playing on thin ice, trying to dip our toes into the dark, but hoping we can jump back to the light side at the last second.
Oh, he is dragging us. Dynamic dilettantes, he calls them.
He's calling out exactly what we do. We like the aesthetic of the dark, but we want the safety of the light. But Koetting's thesis is that you have enough to dive into the depths and be consumed by the lake of fire to be reborn without fear.
It's such a violent metaphor for psychological integration. It's like he's saying you can't just work with demons. You have to let the demonic obsession change your very nature.
And he uses that exact phrase, demonic obsession. He's basically admitting that if you do this enough, you stop being you. You become the thing you summoned.
But he argues it's the only way to ascend. He says demons don't care about morality. They just care about necessity. They act like the gods of any civilization. They change the physical reality, period. No good or bad, just results.
Which brings us to Belial, the first demon he prescribed for this demonic ascension. He calls him a king, a gatekeeper. And he's very specific. He says Belial isn't just a demon from the Gotia, but something much older.
He even gets defensive. He says people will argue with him, citing the Goetia, saying Belial is just a fallen devil. But Koetting insists Belial is part of this unique and little studied group of 4: Abaddon, Amamon, Azazel, and Belial.
And he claims that invoking all 4 together causes a physical materialization of gates. I mean, talk about a high stake. If you mess up that math, you aren't just getting a bad vibe, you're opening a door to spiritual sacrifice.
Okay, I'm staying with my tarot cards for now.
But look at the way he ends this chunk. He mentions demonic formulas, short, rhythmic incantations. He says some people believe these were given by the demons themselves.
It's that loop again. The tool comes from the entity, which reinforces the reality of the entity, which makes the magician even more subjectively synthesized into the system. It's a closed circuit.
A closed circuit that ends in a sandstorm of presence. He says Belial's arrival feels like a suffocating sandstorm. Honestly, if I felt that, I wouldn't be checking my notes. I'd be running for the exit.
Okay, so we're looking at the actual mechanics of the Belial ritual now. And look, he isn't even being subtle about the how-to. He says the altar must be positioned toward the west or the north.
It's so clinical, like a recipe for a cake, but the cake is cosmic dread.
Right. But then he moves from the physical setup to the verbal. He says you don't just say the name. You have to recite the demonic formula, Loric Tasa Befa Wheel She Bilo. and you repeat it over and over until he materializes.
And then, get this, once he shows up in the triangle, you don't just say hello. You command him to open the very gates of divinity and bring hell into your life.
Jesus, talk about commitment to the bit. Most people are just trying to get their landlord to fix a leak, and this guy is asking for an infusion of the abyss.
But look at what follows. He says the first response from Belial is usually a test. He might give you a task that seems meaningless.
And he warns you, if the demon senses fear or uncertainty, he will use it against you. He might take on terrible forms or use a threatening voice just to see if you'll break.
That's the part that gets me. It's a psychological interrogation.
But he provides an out. He says if you're being tested, you counter with absolute authority. You say, Belial, I summoned you so I could raise my throne above the throne of God.
Whoa, now that is a power move.
It's incredibly arrogant. And he acknowledges that the Middle Age or medieval practitioners would see that as a threat. But he claims the real practitioners know that worship is for the dying, and what demons respect is power.
It's such a stark break from the tradition of reverence. He's literally saying, don't bow, just dominate.
And it's not only Belial. He moves to Azazel next. He calls him the demonic Prometheus. He's the one who brings the knowledge and power that leads to spiritual decay, or, if you're the practitioner, divine self-confidence.
I like the way he describes the summoning of Azazel. He says you just have to say the name, and he's already there. And you enter a state of oblivion by repeating the name until his ancient power seeps into the temple.
It sounds a lot like the subjective synthesis he mentioned earlier. You're basically hypnotizing yourself into believing the room is full of black angels.
But look at the result he claims. He says Azazel can teach you to create your own meditations and rituals to increase your natural power. He sees the God in everyone and tries to force that omnipotence to the surface.
It's so expansive. But then he brings in Aosoth, and this is where it gets really weird. He says Aosoth has no fixed gender, no fixed era, and can even take the form of the practitioner themselves.
That's some serious mirror magic right there. That's terrifying.
He actually shares an entry from his very own journal here. He says when the sigil of Aosoth came to life, the entity's presence burst into the room. He describes seeing the entire universe, planets, comets, suns flashing before his eyes like an ethereal screen on the edge of the abyss.
And then, of course, he has to include the cautionary tale. He says Aosoth warned him to be vigilant because people close to him wanted to do him harm. And then, boom, a week later, his entire occult order collapsed and left him swimming in waters full of sharks.
That is incredibly specific. It's like he's trying to prove the ritual worked by showing the real-world chaos it caused.
The magic is real because my life is a mess. I mean, it's a pretty convincing argument if you're into that kind of thing.
But he wraps up the section with Adlamelik. And here's a great catch. He says the animalistic descriptions of Adlamelik the peacock, the mule legs are only there because the magician expects to see them. If you don't expect it, he just appears as a very large, very muscular human.
So the demon is basically a shapeshifter based on your own biases? That's just confirming his whole thesis that the ritual is all about the practitioner's state of mind.
Exactly. It all comes back to the demon's self and the dark alchemy. He's building this massive architecture where every entity is just a tool for the practitioner to reach their own demonic self.
It's a heavy way to live, to constantly be looking for the gates to divinity through the paths of destruction.
Honestly, after hearing about the sandstorm of Belial and the sharks of Aosoth, I think I'll just stick to the pizza and the munchkin game for tonight.
So, we've been talking about the command aspect, but Koetting is pivoting again. He's moving into the idea of the pact, and he starts by making this distinction between a standard evocation and a demonic contract.
And he's being very critical of the standard way here. He says that in traditional evocation, you're trying to force the demon to cooperate just for the mage's benefit.
Which, let's be real, is how most people approach everything. Do this for me, give me that, and don't be too difficult.
Exactly. But look how he defends the pact. He says the pact ensures both sides are satisfied. He actually calls out two major misconceptions here. The first is that if the evoker doesn't see a direct, immediate exchange of services, then the demon isn't getting anything.
Right, like, I didn't see a bag of gold fly out of the triangle, so clearly the demon is working for free.
And the second one is even more biting. He says it's pure ego to think that because the mage hasn't personally received a physical gift, they haven't given anything back. He says we ignore the fact that these ancient, wise, and powerful entities existed long before our first spell.
He's basically saying we're being incredibly rude to our hosts.
I love his analogy here, though. He says, look, If someone puts a plate of delicious, fragrant food in front of you, do you ask the host, "Okay, what are you going to give me in exchange for me eating this?"
I mean, if it's a buffet, I'm definitely asking about the dessert menu.
But he's serious. He compares it to passion. Do you ask what you'll get in return for lovemaking? He says, just like it's human nature to eat, kill, and reproduce, it is the very nature of demons to dominate. They aren't interested in services or mediocre minds. They want power.
Ugh, so basically, you can't bribe them with your little human trinkets. They want the manifestations of power.
And here's the big mythbuster. This is the part that always gets people. He says the most common myth is that the mage's soul is traded for worldly goods. He says demons have zero use for human souls.
Wait, what?
No souls? No selling your soul to the devil for a Ferrari? That's kind of a letdown, isn't it?
He's very firm on this. He says they don't have crystal prisms to store captured souls. They don't care about your eternal essence after death. What they want is a challenge. They are waiting with bated breath for an evoker to give them a task that actually requires their supernatural strength.
So they're basically just bored cosmic mercenaries looking for a heavy lift.
Exactly. And he says a true pact isn't a transaction, it's a partnership. You work together toward a single goal, ascension.
And he describes this incredible technique for when you have a settled pact. He says you don't even need a full ritual anymore. You just enter a meditative state, say the demon's name, or a word of power they gave you, and suddenly, the room is filled with their presence. Not as a physical body, but as transparent energy, just waiting for your command.
That sounds like a recipe for losing your grip on reality.
He actually tells us how to command them in this state. He says, create a clear mental image of the result you want. Strip away fear and doubt, feel the demonic forces surrounding you, and give your command as simply and clearly as possible.
That's it? Just, hey Belial, do this.
He suggests a bit of a conservative approach, though. He says it's best to start with in the name of, I command. And this is crucial. Always set a time limit.
Yeah, he warns that the longer the contract lasts, the more spontaneous and unpredictable the effects become.
Spontaneous is a very polite word for chaos.
And he proves his point with a story about one of his students. The student had a pact with an ancient demon. The demon sent 3 familiars to stay with him. Suddenly, the student's every thought and dream started affecting the physical world. There was no gap between thought and action anymore.
That sounds like a nightmare. One bad mood and you've accidentally leveled a building.
Which is why he emphasizes, set a time frame, and when it's over, call the demon back to thank them, and release both parties from the bonds of the contract.
Because apparently even the demons don't want to be stuck in a permanent roommate situation with a human.
But then, he takes a dark turn. He says the least acceptable way to use demonic power is through voluntary submission.
Here we go. The bad idea section.
He says if you choose to submit your will to a massive demon, you are moving toward absolute darkness and true evil. He says the demon will start with small tasks, tiny sacrifices, just to test your obedience.
And then, once you've done a few, the demon starts reshaping your entire life to look more like the hellish worlds.
I can see where this is going. It's not exactly a wellness retreat.
He even mentions that people end up committing crimes because the demons help them do it without getting caught by the authorities.
The magic worked. I'm a criminal now.
But he says the real danger isn't just the crime, it's the psychological trap. He says some mages try to use demons to satisfy their secret whims because they aren't brave enough to do it themselves. But a true demon won't just fulfill your little desires. They will force you to do things you thought were impossible. They will force you to live a completely different life.
It sounds like a total deconstruction of the self.
And he ends this section with a massive warning. He says this kind of submission can become an addiction stronger than any drug. He warns that those already on the edge of losing their enough minds will cross a line where they can never regain their own will.
And the demons will just live in them, like parasites.
Well, I think I've had enough demonic energy for one episode. I'm going to go find some more of that pizza.
I think we're all with you, Paco.
Let's take a breather before the heavy stuff completely breaks us.
Total agreement. Let's just jam it out for a second.
Alright, we're back. Alright, we're back. And I think we all need a moment to just settle. That last section was heavy.
Heavy is an understatement. It felt like sitting in a room where the oxygen was slowly being sucked out.
Tell me about it. I'm just here for the snacks, honestly. If I don't eat something soon, I might actually start seeing the entities myself.
Please, Paco, don't give Koetting any ideas. You're already halfway to a demonic pact with that pizza craving.
Speaking of which, Paco, are you heading out for a break?
Yeah, I need to move. My jaw is still acting up from that dental demon, and I need a distraction. But hey, before I go, let's look at this next part. It gets much more instructional.
It does. We're moving into what I call the architect phase. He's moving away from the philosophy of the soul and straight into the mechanics of command. He's talking about the elemental kings.
It's such a pivot. One minute, we're talking about the terrifying ascent to divinity, and the next, he's like, here's how to draw a blue triangle for the wind guy. It's almost mundane.
He starts by saying that ascension can take strange forms. He says the magician uses their will to create a kingdom to rule over the material world. But then, and this is the part that always gets me, he says the path to divinity is the same path that leads a person to dust, and that the practitioner might return to a body that is more animal than God.
See, that's the part I can't get past. This idea that you can play with these forces and not lose your humanity. He's describing a loop. You climb up, but the tracks are the same ones that lead to the grave. It's a very cynical way to view spiritual evolution.
I don't know, Jing. I think he's just being realistic. You can't touch the sun without getting burned, but look at how he transitions. He says the magician becomes a god not through miracles or a messianic life, but through one step after another. It's about accumulation.
It's a construction project, like he's building a skyscraper out of rituals.
Exactly, and he uses the alchemists as his blueprint. He lists these armies of spiritual soldiers under 4 kings. And look at the instructions for Paralda, the king of air. He literally says, just draw a circle and a triangle on the ground in white or blue, or place smoking incense around the perimeter.
That's it? Just some blue chalk and some incense? It sounds like a DIY home renovation guide. How to summon a storm for under $20.
Hey, don't knock it. If it works, it works. But check out the words he promises. Virginia, the King of Fire, he says he can teach you to raise your body temperature or release bursts of energy.
That sounds a lot like the somatic work I do in Tantra, controlling the internal heat. It's interesting how he's framing mastery as physical control.
But it's more than physical. He says Jinni can teach you to use the astral element to wrap your will in fire. He's trying to bridge that gap between the internal state and the external reality.
But look at the King of Earth, Gabo. He says he can teach you everything from gardening to investments.
Now that is a demon I can get behind. Forget the apocalypse. Just give me a high-yield savings account and some prize-winning tomatoes.
See, that's the architect mindset. He's stripping the mystery away and replacing it with utility. Use this king to get this specific result. It's very transactional.
Right. He's setting up this tension. On one, he's saying you're a lone god king, but on the other, he's romanticizing this lost era of mass magic, where priests and assistants were essential.
He's actually trying to bridge them. He mentions John Dee and Edward Kellett. He admits Dee's whole career depended on someone else, the seer, who could actually see the angels.
Which is exactly what I was saying earlier. It's a dependency. He calls it synergy or partnership, but if one person is the only one who can actually see the target, the other person is just a glorified errand boy.
A foil à deux, as he puts it. But even if the assistant is just there to stir the incense or pass the tools, the core operation is still one person.
It's the paradox of his book. He wants to give you the power to be a solitary sovereign deity, but he keeps pointing back to this heavy ritualistic tradition of hierarchy and assistance. He wants you to be the architect, but he's handing you a blueprint that requires a whole construction crew.
And I wonder, if we enough following the proven steps he's laying out, are we actually commanding reality? Or are we just following instructions?
At that point, you're not a magician. You're just a technician.
Well, on that cheery note, I'm going to go find some material manifestation in the form of a save witch.
Go on, then. We'll be here, trying to figure out if we're masters of the elements or just people playing with blue chalk. Okay, I'm actually glad Paco's heading for a snack, because this next part, it's where Koetting starts talking about folie à deux.
Wait, didn't you just use that to describe the assistants in the last section? The synergy of the group?
He does, but look how he redefines it here. He's not talking about a partnership anymore. He's calling it a psychological and behavioral disorder. He says it's when a dominant, psychotic, or psychopathic personality influences a more stable person to share their delusion.
Wow, that is dark, even for him. He's basically saying that group magic isn't just about shared intent. It's about one person's madness infecting the rest of the group.
Hey, I'm still here. I can hear you.
Good, because this is terrifying, Paco. He's saying that density of materialization increases with other evocators, but then he warns that if you just gather people for entertainment, it'll backfire. He says the untrained mind can't handle the sensory load.
Yeah, and he says the worst case scenario isn't even a demon appearing, it's that the dilettante sees nothing, thinks it's a farce, and then, well, look at this part. He claims that even if they don't see anything, the demons still respond to their names, and they'll manifest in that person's life as nothing other than evil.
So even if you're just playing and you don't believe, you're still opening a door you can't close. That's a heavy way to frame spiritual responsibility.
It's a way to scare people into submission. Don't try this unless he's part of the elite. And then he follows it up with this incredibly elitist idea that the real masters have been studying forbidden arts since childhood and have sacrificed their entire lives.
It's a classic gatekeeper move, Jane, but look at the pivot he makes right after. He says if you've admired great occultists, you should start your first group rituals with them. He's saying if you're a solo practitioner, you can just wait for a partner to show up at your door.
That sounds a lot like how he met Seth. No ritual required, just a lot of shared confusion about Munchkin strategy.
Hey, that was highly spiritual.
Anyway, he moves into how to find these partners. He says most occult orders are just ego trips for a leader, but you should look for people who are tired of all this nonsense and want to move to the next level.
Tired of the nonsense. That's exactly what he's doing to the reader. He's trying to recruit an army of the disillusioned.
Well, look at the specific instruction. He says the most effective magic happens with strangers, not friends, not people you know. Because with strangers, you don't have social connections or biases to get in the way.
That's a massive red flag for me. He says you might trust them with your secrets, but you wouldn't trust them with your life, because you only see their outer shell. He's literally advocating for a ritual practice built on a foundation of total interpersonal alienation.
It's an architect move. He's trying to strip away the human element to make the machine of the ritual more efficient. He wants pure, unadulterated will, unburdened by empathy or connection.
Okay, I'm back. Is everyone arguing about the ethics of stranger magic again?
We're trying to decide if he's describing a way to achieve power or just a way to build a cult of isolated specialists.
Well, speaking of tools, he's getting into the actual gear now. He's talking about scrying devices.
Oh, I like this part. He's talking about mirrors and water.
He suggests black painted glass or even polished obsidian, but then he gets surprisingly DIY. He says a large steel or silver bowl works, or even a large undecorated bird feeder, or a simple bowl filled with water.
A bird feeder. Of course. How to achieve cosmic transcendence using garden supplies.
I mean, if it works, it works. I've seen people do crazy things with a deck of cards.
He says water is the most receptive substance because of its conductivity between the flesh and the powerful forces. He even tells the story about how he once saw the secrets of a companion just by looking into a glass of water.
No way.
He says it. Nothing better for this purpose than that.
It's a wild claim, but he brings it back to the technicality. He says you have to set the device at a specific angle so you don't see reflections of the room like stalagmites, clouds, or even ceiling fans.
Because the logical mind and everyday vision will block the true vision. You have to let the physical world melt away into this white mist.
And there it is, the architect again. He's giving you the instructions to bypass your own brain, to turn your consciousness into a sensor for something else. It's not about finding truth. It's about deactivating the part of you that can question if what you're seeing is real.
And that, I think, is the core of the tension we've been feeling all night. Is this the path to the divine, or just a very sophisticated way to induce a hallucination? Okay, I've been looking at the actual instructions for the scrying part. He doesn't start with a prayer or a mantra. He starts with your hands.
Your hands? Like just hovering?
Exactly. He says to extend your right hand over the portal of the water or the glass about 3 to 5 centimeters above the surface. And you have to consciously control your breathing. Deep inhales, slow exhales.
So basically a yoga class, but with more potential for spontaneous combustion.
Wait, look at what happens next. He says, as your pranayama brings your energies into harmony, you'll feel this tangible magnetism between your palm and the portal.
Like static electricity?
Close. He says it's a simultaneous pull and push. Your hand is being repelled by the surface, but at the same time, it's being pulled back just strongly enough that your hand doesn't actually lift off. It stays suspended by this invisible tension.
That sounds like a classic sensory trick. You tense your muscles in a specific way, your hand trembles, and suddenly you're convinced there's a magnetic force at play. It's a physiological feedback loop.
He actually addresses that. He says, once this stabilizes, once your hand is just hovering, vibrating slightly with the energy. You're supposed to quietly say the word is, so your partners know you're ready.
Is? That's it? No behold or witness? Just a, yeah, I'm here.
Just is. But then, Jane, this is where it gets into that territory you hate. He says, if your body can feel this, then your eyes will be able to see, and your ears will be able to hear. You are one, not a collection of different parts.
There it is. The holistic trap. He's trying to bypass the critical faculty by claiming the physical and the spiritual are already unified. It's a way to shut down the part of the brain that says, hey, Jane, you're just staring at a bowl of water.
But look at the technique he prescribes for the actual seeing. He says to use a relaxed gaze, like you're looking at someone approaching you through a heavy snowfall. You're waiting for them to come close enough to see.
And he warns that your lower self is going to fight you. He says your rational mind will start scolding you, telling you that you're making a fool of yourself, or that any vision is just a trick of your imagination.
To be fair, that's not lower self talking, Seth. That's just basic literacy and common sense.
But he says the physical body will fight too. Muscles stiffening, lungs refusing to breathe. He says the only way through is to keep the body under control through deep, rhythmic breathing. And then, and this is the part I found most interesting, he says the surface will start to turn misty or cloudy.
Like a fog?
Yeah, and he tells you not to dismiss it. He says people think it's just a reflection or an optical illusion or just your eyes watering. But he claims this mist is the definitive sign that your clairvoyant abilities are waking up. It's the precursor to the full immersion.
And there's that architect again. He's defining the proof of the ritual before it even happens. If you see mist, it's magic. If you don't, you're just not trying hard enough. It's a closed loop.
But check out the payoff, though. He says when the mist clears, your consciousness is actually pulled into the portal. He describes it as a sensation of losing consciousness, like a wave of ecstatic frenzy washing over you.
That sounds intense. Like a total surrender of the ego.
So, it's a highly subjective hallucination that you're instructed to call reality.
But he also says that without prior preparation, without the invocations and ceremonial preparations, he's been preaching about the visions will be meaningless or disorganized. He's saying you can't just stumble into this. You have to fix yourself in a psychological state of receptivity.
He even gives a specific command for when you're ready. Once you've penetrated the misty veil, you're supposed to whisper the word, I enter.
I enter. Very dramatic.
He warns not to raise your voice, though, or you'll break the trance for everyone else. And then, the climax. He provides an actual incantation. A string of words. Itzranta, Tazkalutas Tafta Sasfalu.
Sounds like something out of a dark fantasy RPG.
After the incantation, he says you call for the first vision. He uses an example. Show us the mountainous landscapes in the mirror, Hildala. And he claims that even if the image isn't fully formed, you'll feel the presence of the spirit.
Immerse yourself in the vision. Don't just gaze at it.
And there we are, back to the same place. He wants you to stop being an observer and start being a participant in the hallucination. He's not teaching you how to see the world, Seth. He's teaching you how to disappear into a different one. I think I need to go cleanse my ears of all this drama with something a bit more primal.
Oh wait, is that the didgeridoo? You never bring that out.
As she starts to drone on grabbing the tambourine. Let's take 5.
All right, let's get back into the thick of it. All right, we are back in the thick of it. We're looking at the mechanics of the group ritual. Now how you move from a single person staring into a mirror to a collective engine of intent.
And it sounds so intense. Like the way he describes the transition between visions, it's almost like they're trying to reset a computer.
Exactly. Look at the text right here. He says once the vision of the mountain range reaches final clarity, you don't just move on. You have to tell your companions, entered. And only when everyone responds with that same word do you lift your eyes to look at each other.
Because you have to break the link.
Right. To break the link between your inner vision and that vision, clearing your perception for the next one. It's a deliberate decoupling.
I love that. It's like, okay, we saw the mountains, great, now let's clear the cache before we load the next level. But then he gets into the physical part. The hands, the clockwise movements.
The magical magnetism. He says you move your hands 3 to 5 centimeters above the surface, stirring the visions in the blackness of this cauldron. It's so visceral. It's kinetic.
But look at what happens next. He says the portal is ready when white mist appears, and then, boom, sudden jump to the island of Sabul. Show me the secret island of Sabul. Show me the secret island of Sabul.
And it's not a random hallucination. He claims this is a testing ground. He even says these places, the mountains, The island are real, even if the names are just internal landmarks.
Wait, hold on. It says these places house the two most wonderful temples on this planet, and they are power places used every day. That's a massive claim, Seth. He's saying the astral geography is overlapping with our physical reality.
He is. He's arguing that the distinction between there and here dissolves once you have spiritual kinship with the site.
Right, as long as you don't mind the spiritual kinship involving potentially disturbing entities. Because look at the third vision. This is where it gets creepy. He introduces the demon Raya. And he says, get this, Raya is unique because while the demon can feel your gaze and even talk to you, he will not appear in a full evocation. He won't obey commands.
No way. So he's just watching you?
Exactly. He just shows his face in the mirror. And Koetting even warns, do not engage in any telepathic communication with him, as the demon will clearly attempt to use such a trick.
That is terrifying. It's like a predator just staring at you through a window, waiting for you to trip up.
It's a complete break from the command and control approach we talked about earlier. Usually, the goal is to bend the entity to your will, but here, the practitioner is essentially being tested by a presence that refuses to be mastered.
Okay, but let's pivot to the power in numbers part, because this is where I get excited. He moves into Group Evocation 1. This isn't just a shared experience, it's a quartet of mages.
I love the imagery here. A ritual circle that's a trench filled with water, 3 meters wide. 4 participants, dividing the invocations like musical parts.
It's beautiful, actually. He says it's almost natural how people fall into their roles. One person takes fire, another air. He says he's never even seen them argue over who stands where. They just know.
I'd like to see that happen in our group after a long night of Munchkin. We'd be arguing over who has to stand in the damn trench for hours.
Hey, leave the magic to the professionals, but look at the intensity of the ritual itself. They're using sandalwood and dittany blue candles, a bowl of honey or sweet wine. And then this part, the evoker at the south takes the cup and says, I drink the blood of God. I take into myself all his power.
That is such a heavy, transformative moment. He's describing a literal recharging of the person through the consecrated liquid.
It connects back to his earlier claim about subjective synthesis. You aren't just performing a play, you are consuming the ritual. You are becoming the ritual.
Until the very end when they say, he is near.
And then they just start the incense. The tension is just, it's palpable.
Okay, the energy in here is shifting. We've moved from the individual's mirror to the group's triangle. And look, the instructions for this stage are, well, they're intense. He says you place your hands on the altar and stare at the sigil. You have to see the inner essence of the symbol lying deeper than paper and ink.
That sounds like the subjective synthesis he mentioned earlier. You're trying to dissolve the object itself.
Exactly. And then, this is the part that gets me. He says you breathe in, feel the approach, and then breathe out and see the lines of the sigil glowing with the power radiating from it. You keep doing this until the sigil stops being a physical object and becomes a spiritual element that turns the temple into the center of the metaphysical universe.
A bit dramatic, isn't it? The center of the universe? I mean, I've had caffeine hits that felt more transformative than that.
But wait, Jane, look at the cue. Once the sigil is glowing, the evoker gives the signal. One word, it is coming. And only when everyone says it is coming, do you look at each other.
It's that collective synchronization again. And then, he describes the manifestation. It's not some subtle vibe. He says the presence becomes an embodied entity that will take full physical form within seconds.
That's a massive leap. From a glowing sigil to a physical body in seconds.
And it's not even starting in the triangle. He says the spirit is wandering the room first. It's like a ghost in a horror movie, just pacing the perimeter before it decides to show up in the middle of the smoke.
Yeah, but look at how they pull it in. They use the smoke. The incense is the medium. As the group's will intensifies, they direct the spirit from the edges of the room, through the veils, right into the triangle.
And the commands? They're so structured, it's a call and response from the four corners. The south calls for a visible form and a distinct voice. The west says, we've prepared this temple for you. The north demands the presence. And the east?
The east is the heavy hitter. We have forced the heavens to shift. Gods and angels have yielded the way. Devils and demons have opened the way.
Talk about an ego trip. We force the heavens to shift. I can barely get my car to start on a Monday morning, and these guys are rearranging the cosmos.
But you can't deny the tension, Jane. He says the whole temple will be enough to be filled with an exoidability similar to the trembling Enoch felt when he ascended. It's a state of high-frequency vibration.
But, and here's the kicker, he adds a huge caveat. He says, even while this power is boiling in your veins, you must maintain absolute composure. Your breathing must be steady. Your heart must be calm.
That's a wild contradiction. How do you hold absolute authority and divine power while trying not to let your heart rate spike?
It's like being a bomb disposal expert. One shaky breath, and boom, the portal blows up in your face.
He actually says the calmness of the group is what allows the forces to enter without resistance. If you're too excited, you're blocking the portal.
And look at the visual sign. It's not a person appearing instantly. It starts as a white mist in the center of the triangle. It's thick. It stays about a meter off the ground, hovering, like a concentrated cloud of something.
And then he drops the most practical yet unsettling part. He says the spirit, specifically this entity Abertala, uses a dual communication. You get the verbal level questions and answers, but then there's a silent, telepathic level.
The Hibben conversation.
Exactly. The spirit bypasses your conscious mind. It plants ideas, intuitions, and messages directly into your brain, and you don't even realize it's happening until later. You think it's your own spontaneous thought, but it's actually the demon whispering in your ear.
That is a nightmare for anyone who values their own autonomy. You can't even trust your own aha moments anymore.
It ties back to that reprogramming the brain claim from the start. If the goal is to deactivate the brain's interference, you've essentially opened a back door for the entity to walk right in.
It's a complete surrender of the self. You start by commanding the spirit to appear, and you end by being a vessel for its suggestions.
Which is why the ritual has enough to end with a formal dismissal. The North Mage has to say, "Go into the world and make happen what we have commanded. You are free."
You have to close the door. Because if you don't, and you're still wandering the room with that heavy telepathic connection, you might not be the one in charge of your own house anymore.
Okay, we just witnessed the peak of the group ritual, the engines of intent, fully engaged. But now, Koetting takes it to a level that feels less like a ritual and more like a cosmic heavy metal album cover.
I mean, look at the setup. He's talking about more than one triangle now. He's describing two triangles of manifestation, one in the north and one in the south. Two separate altars, two separate energies.
And it's more than more stuff. It's specific. He says for the north, you need frankincense, but for the south, you need pine. It's like he's trying to create a sensory clash, a friction between these two poles.
And check out the stakes. He says if you call the spirits Tenebrion and Masfidel together, the air becomes so thick with stifling darkness that it feels like every inhabitant of hell is just standing there, frozen, watching the ceremony, waiting for a single signal to strike.
That is a hell of a way to describe a Tuesday night.
But look at the mechanics, Jane. It's not random. He says you can choose your flavor of evocation. If you like earth energies, you call Perescu a water spirit riding a wave, and Fuscar a fire spirit who literally breathes smoke.
It's so beautiful, though. The imagery of the fire spirit's skin being reddish and his very breath being smoke. It's so vivid. It's that subjective synthesis again. You're building a world.
Yeah. Well, if you prefer angelic vibes, he says you can go with Andrevid, beautiful female angel, and Egregore, an androgynous figure.
And then he brings in the planetary stuff. Jupiter with Alator, Mercury with Morisco. It's like a cosmic menu. Would you like a demon, an angel, or a planet with your dinner?
But here's where the engineer in me starts to get nervous. Because he makes this huge claim about pairing. He says you must evoke entities that are naturally opposed to one another. He says if you do this right, it creates a spontaneous effect that unites their efforts to achieve your goal.
It's like using two opposing forces to create a stable circuit.
But look at the warning, Emily. He says you can't just pick pairs at random. He says if you try to evoke spirits that are incompatible, or if you exceed 4 spirits, the result isn't magic. It's extreme, life-altering spiritual and occult damage.
He literally says it can blind and maim you for the rest of your life.
And he's not even being hyperbolic. He says the failure comes from the same place as the success, the ego. If you think you have more moral reputation than the spirits, or if you challenge them even with a hint of disrespect, the ritual collapses into a deadly struggle for power.
It's the don't poke the bear rule.
So the ritual itself, let's walk through it. They're staring at the sigils. The lines start to glow. And then they all say, in unison, there is.
Est. Just one word. But then the invocation starts. The South group calls to Tenebrion. Hear our voices, see our signs. Let your power become our power. And then the North group repeats the exact same formula for Masfidel.
It's a mirror image. Two sides of the same coin. They touch the sigils. They impregnate the paper with energy. And then this is the part that always gets me. They wait for the South spirit to materialize. First,
because you don't want the whole room full of demons at once. You bring one in, you get the hang of it, and then you call the second.
And the command? It has to be prepared beforehand. The command must be clearly formulated so that it is acceptable to every participant. No room for, let's see what happens, improvising here.
It's so disciplined. But then the end. He says that after all this, the group work, the intense power, the cosmic scale, the whole point is that the experience is integrated back into the individual.
The path is ultimately a personal one.
Exactly. He says you use the group to build the muscles, but you take those lessons back to your solitary practice. The group ritual is just a way to learn how to sit on your invisible throne in the dark, alone.
It's a heavy way to live, but I guess if you're going to rule your own universe, you might as well learn how to do it with a few allies at your back first. I need a snack, or a joke, or a nap. I'm losing the thread.
That's because you're losing your focus, Seth. Don't let him off easy just because he's being profound.
Alright, let's settle in. Okay, let's settle in. We're moving into a heavy section of Koetting's Evoking Eternity. We've been talking about the power of the group, but here he starts to pivot.
And it feels like a pivot towards something much more lonely.
Exactly. He says that while group rituals are useful and convenient, the experienced evoker starts to see them as something secondary. Almost like a curiosity or something you do when you just want entertainment.
Ouch. He's basically calling group magic a party trick.
A party trick that keeps you from losing your mind, Paco.
But look at how he frames the alternative. He says when the practitioner hungers for true power, they go to the temple alone, to bear the very sword of age-old wisdom and stand at the head of their own kingdom.
It's so hyper-individualistic. It's that architect energy we talked about. But it's also terrifying. He's talking about sequential evocation, calling entities one after another, back to back, without a single pause.
Without a break? You can't even catch your breath between them?
No pause. He says the energy from the first spirit creates an inertia that hits the second. He actually suggests a specific strategy here. Identify two entities with similar natures and call the harder one first, then the easier one.
Wait, hold on. He says the harder one first? That sounds like a recipe for a disaster. If you're already draining your battery on a heavyweight, how are you going to handle the second one?
He addresses that. He says the physical and psychological state moves toward exhaustion. He even claims that in rare cases, he and his colleagues have actually lost consciousness before the ritual ends.
Okay, let's stop right there. Lost consciousness. That's not magic, Seth. That's a medical emergency.
Well, look at what he says about it. He calls it a metamorphosis. He says that when the fragile self is gone, it's the divine I that stays. He's essentially saying, if you pass out, don't worry, your higher self is still running the show.
That is a wild way to justify a blackout. Who finishes the ritual while we are dead before we are resurrected in the flesh. That's heavy, man. That's some serious cosmic horror right there.
It sounds like a way to bypass accountability. I didn't mean to command a demon to eat my house. I was just unconscious.
He does try to add a safeguard. He says we must strive for constant awareness. But then, he immediately jumps into the mechanics of how to keep the momentum going. He says the command to both spirits must be identical in letter and spirit.
Because if they conflict, it's game over. He uses this intense metaphor, a spiritual equivalent of a nuclear chain reaction.
Okay, I've seen enough. I'm staying away from the nuclear magic.
But wait, he provides a cautionary tale. He tells a very story about one of his most ambitious students. This student was obsessed with sigils. He was activating them one after another, trying to solve every problem and fulfill every desire at once.
Let me guess. It didn't end well.
Not at all. The student was found the next morning sitting on a sofa in his ritual robes, staring into absolutely nothing. Just a vacant gaze. He was essentially a vegetable for a couple of days until his normal state returned.
That is so much more haunting than the nuclear part. That's a complete erasure of the person.
It's a warning, you can't use magic like a vending machine. If you try to pull every lever at once, you don't get all the prizes, you just break the machine.
Exactly. He says the power of intention is what overcomes everything. You have to focus on a single goal, not everything at once.
Easier said than done when you're staring at a sigil in a dark temple.
But he moves straight into the how-to. He actually gives us a specific ritual for two spirits, Dumkael and Fertal, the brothers of the southern winds.
They say these two are great for inclining people to agree with the magician's will. A bit manipulative, isn't it?
Perhaps. But he lays out the setup. One altar facing south, two sigils, face down. one triangle of manifestation in the southeast for Dumka-al, one in the southwest for Ferdal. Even specifies the incense rose for one, pine for the other.
He's getting very specific now. It's like a recipe for a very dangerous cake.
He describes the process of activating the first sigil. You look at it, establish the connection, and then you use a ritual dagger to touch the parchment, letting the all-powerful force pass through the blade into the paper.
And then, according to him, the first signs of the spirit's physical presence are dizziness and shortness of breath.
My shoulders are feeling that weight again, just hearing it.
He ends this part with the practitioner lifting a cup of liquid over their head, staring between the two triangles, trying to bridge that gap between the physical and the other. Okay, we're back in the thick of it. We left off with a setup for the Brothers of the Southern Winds, and now Koetting moves into the actual visceral performance of the rite.
And it starts with drinking.
Yeah, he describes this part as the wine of God. He says the practitioner should drink it, saying, "I drink the blood of God, I absorb all his power." And he describes the sensation of the elixir streaming through your veins, driving out any exhaustion to revive you for the rest of the ritual.
Right, because nothing says focused magical intent like a shot of divine blood to prevent a mid-ritual nap.
Hey, if it keeps you from becoming a vegetable like that student we talked about, I'm in.
Well, he says the purpose is to prepare the space. He has you placing your hands on the altar, palms down, over the sigils. And then for Dunkal, you have to trace the lines of the sigil with a ritual dagger and transfer your desire into the paper.
He uses this really heavy language here. He says, when the paper and ink turn into spirit, the entity will already be tangibly present. He describes Dunkal as this spiritual giant waiting in a mist.
It's a lot of psychological heavy lifting. You're basically trying to hallucinate a giant into existence through sheer willpower.
But he claims the momentum is the key. He explicitly says that while people think calling two entities is harder, the momentum created by the joint invocation actually helps. He even says that if you follow the basic principles, the magic happens even without the mage's direct interference.
See, that's what I mean. He's saying the chain reaction is already set in motion. He's basically saying the trap is set, now just try not to get eaten.
And then he drops the warning. He says anyone trying evocation without specific goals or proper preparation will invoke what is beyond their understanding, and the result will be terrifying.
It's that same theme of losing control. He says once the smoke thickens and the white mist appears in the triangles, it is no longer possible to stop the forces that have been set in motion.
He gives the actual command next. It's incredibly commanding. Dumkaal, Fertal, brothers of the southern winds, come into this world from the worlds beyond. Manifest in these triangles, in this eternal temple, on this plane of flesh and enough matter.
On this plane of flesh and matter. Man, he's not leaving much to the imagination. He's practically inviting them to come and sit on your face.
He says the tension becomes unbearably intense. He warns that the dizziness will be on the verge of causing loss of consciousness. And then, and this is the part that always gets me, he tells you to keep chanting their names until you fall into oblivion.
Until you fall into oblivion. So, once again, the goal is to completely lose your mind. He's basically prescribing a controlled seizure.
But look at the goal. He says it's to let everything that was material and mortal die, so that you can see the bodies of the brothers forming in the south.
Okay, so we've summoned the brothers. We've almost passed out. What's next? More fainting?
Actually, he shifts gears to something even bigger. The Tower Guardians.
Oh boy, here we go, the heavy hitters.
He claims the four cardinal directions, north, east, west, south, are ruled by these guardians. He says modern New Age magic completely fails to grasp their nature because they are permanent and enough and unchanging, and have a natural connection to the earthly world.
He's contrasting them with the archangels. He says while it is difficult to dispute the power of the four archangels, their power pales before the irresistible power of the four guardians.
Wow. He just demoted Michael and Gabriel. That's a bold move, even for a black magic manual.
He's demoting them and replacing them with something much older. He mentions the Maya deities, Ish, Kalak, Khan, and Mulak, saying their rites were ancient and sometimes bloody, and that they shake the very foundations of reality.
It's a classic move. The stuff you know is cute, but the stuff I'm telling you about is ancient and terrifying.
But he gives a specific method. If you want to call the archangels, you go east, west, north, south. But if you want the demonic kings, Beelzebub, Satan, Azazel, and Astaroth, you set up the altar facing south.
He's really leaning into the hierarchy here. It's all about which way you point the altar and which way you rotate the clock.
Exactly. And he tells you to activate the sigils in a specific direction depending on who you're calling. Clockwise for the angels, counterclockwise for the demons. He says if you do it right, you'll hear their voices carried on the wind or see the room flickering with light.
It sounds so overwhelming. Like the entire atmosphere of the room is being overwritten by something else.
He ends this section with a great invocation for all the guardians at once. And the final instruction is the most intense. He says, let the flow of the Sidera text, dritual, escape the control of your imperfect will and find its own will.
There it is. The way to avoid responsibility. Don't blame me. My imperfect will lost control, and now there's a demon in the kitchen.
Hey, if the divine will wants a slice of pizza, who am I to argue?
But that's the point of the whole book, isn't it? The tension between the architect who commands and the devotee who surrenders. Whether you're building a kingdom or letting the kingdom build you. We're at the climax of the ritual description now. The tension is peaking. He describes the tower guardians finally taking shape in their triangles around the circle. He says the incense smoke thickens into a shimmering white mist, and their images manifest as their presence densifies in this world.
It sounds so ethereal, like the boundary between us and them is just dissolving.
And then he gives the command. He tells the practitioner to turn to the east or south depending on the spirit and recite the conjuration. It's very direct. I call and command you to manifest yourself in this temple, to appear before me in visible form and speak to me with a distinct voice.
A distinct voice. Because heaven forbid they show up and just whisper cryptically, he wants a clear audio connection.
I mean, if I'm summoning a demon, I want to know if it's actually there or if it's just my tinnitus.
But look at the sequence here. He says the first spirit starts forming its body from subtle etheric particles. And as that white mist thickens, you move to the next triangle. You go around the circle, clockwise or counterclockwise, and then, and this is the part that ties back to the chaos we mentioned, you return to the first spirit and shout, Tower Guardians appear.
And that's when everything breaks. He says their presence becomes more dense and tangible, and the whole operation takes on a more chaotic character than before.
Of course, because orderly is too boring for a ritual involving the Tower Guardians.
He describes it as intense. Their forms flicker violently, appearing and disappearing in your field of vision. Their voices fill the world with clatter and noise, and their energies permeate the temple, mixing right above the altar.
That sounds less like a ritual and more like a construction site in the middle of a thunderstorm.
And then he brings us back to that architect idea. He says, once all four are standing in their triangles, you must slowly face each one, giving them the same single instruction, one by one. But, and here's the heavy part, he says, you will feel a clear and intense tension of conflicting energies trying to stay in balance.
And he says, you are the one who has to hold it.
Exactly. He says, you must become a centrifuge for the swirling forces and energies, pulling them in while simultaneously subjecting the flow of the ritual to your absolute will.
A centrifuge. So you're a high-speed laboratory instrument.
That is a massive amount of pressure. If you slip, even for a second, that centrifuge just explodes.
But he offers a way to use that tension. He introduces a concept that is almost beautiful, in a twisted way. He says you can evoke entities whose inner nature is absolutely opposite, but whose divine purpose is perfectly aligned.
Oh, I love this. This is like the alchemy of the soul.
He gives an example, the Archangel Raphael, the divine healer, and the Goetic demon Marbas. He says one is a healer of the Sephiroth, and the other is a demon who supposedly brings souls to perdition.
One heals, one destroys. That sounds like a recipe for a massive headache.
But look at his logic. He says their function is the same, to heal the human spirit. Raphael uses pure divine energy, while Marbas uses very dense energies coming from the earth, specifically the Muladhara, or root chakra. He says this combination works miracles.
So it's like combining high-voltage electricity with a massive grounding wire. It's still dangerous, but it actually gets the job done without blowing the circuit breaker.
Exactly. But then he moves into something even more radical. He starts a new section called Evoking Legions.
Legions? That's not a ritual anymore. That's an invasion.
He starts with a personal memory. He tells us about a painting he saw when he was 16, a young sorcerer in a twilight cave, holding a glowing sword and a leather-bound grimoire, surrounded by legions of demons. He says the image of the demons wailing in the darkness has never left his memory.
A bit cliche, isn't it? The mysterious painting trope.
Maybe, but he uses it to make a claim. He says for a long time, he thought it was just a metaphor for human power. But then, he says, he actually did it. He performed evocation where he summoned a multitude of entities at once.
Waited once? Like a whole crowd?
He says he didn't believe it was possible for one person to command legions. He thought he'd accidentally opened forbidden gates to an unknown universe. But when the ritual ended and the spirits all returned through the gates, the goal was achieved in an incredibly short time.
So, He's basically saying, I accidentally summoned an army and it worked great. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
It's such a terrifying way to learn. No training, just accidental mass summoning.
He explains the mechanics, though. He says you can't use individual sigils for everyone in the crowd like that. It's too much. You have to change the ritual to establish sufficient contact with a group of entities rather than each one individually.
And he brings up the tools again, the magic squares.
Right. He says while sigils connect the mage's mind to a specific spirit, magic squares are much more extensive and complex. He claims they act as multi-dimensional portals that can be used to travel between dimensions or summon vast legions.
A multi-dimensional portal made of numbers and letters. It sounds like he's trying to turn math into a teleporter.
But he says the real magic isn't in the math or the aesthetics. It's in the hidden geometry of the corners and the sacron meaning of the words. He says a master can use them to open gates to the transcendental.
It's all so much scale. We went from a single person in a room to a person commanding entire universes.
And that's where we have to leave it for today. The scale of what he's describing, it's hard to even wrap your head around without feeling that centrifuge tension himself. Let's pause the cosmic scale for a second. My stomach is definitely feeling that centrifuge tension.
Perfect timing. The delivery guy just buzzed the French feast has arrived.
All right, enough celebrating. Let's get back to the text.
All right, let's settle in. We're looking at the mechanics of the architect today. We're moving through Koetting's manual, specifically how he structures the physical space to facilitate what he calls the materialization of spirits.
The air in here already feels heavy, and we haven't even started the reading.
That's just the leftover energy from our Munchkin game, Em. Or maybe it's just the lack of snacks.
It's the lack of focus. Can we just get to the text?
Right. So, we're at the part where he's setting the stage. He's talking about the periphery of the Circle 8 sensors, and he's very specific about the scent, pine, cedar, or any coniferous resin. He wants a forest smell in the temple.
That makes sense, actually. It's grounding. It's like using scent to bridge the gap between the wild, external world and the consecrated space of the ritual.
Exactly. But look at how he shifts the posture. He says the altar should face north, but, and this is the key, the magician should be sitting in the chair behind the altar, not standing.
Sitting? That's a far cry from the traditional Solomonic stance. Usually, you're standing, active, bracing yourself. Why a sudden move to a chair?
He's moving away from the ceremonial towards something more stationary, more commanding. He says the tools, the dagger, the chalice, the candle stay in their usual places, but the center is this 13 by 13 centimeter square on parchment.
And he's pulling from the Abramelin magic here, the Anakim square, the giants.
Yeah, he's using the Anakim square as the primary gateway. He tells the practitioner to gaze into it until they feel a primary connection. He describes it vividly. Feel how 1,000 eyes watch you through this square. 1,000 voices reach you through it. 1,000 forms are ready to appear in the temple at your command.
1,000 eyes. It sounds a bit much, doesn't it? A bit theatrical?
But Shane, isn't that the subjective synthesis he talked about earlier? That state where the doctrine has enough to become your reality. If you don't expect the eyes, you won't see them.
Exactly. He even gives the command. You take the dagger, touch the parchment, and say, I call you and give you the power to fulfill the task for which you will embody in this temple. And then he describes a physical sensation.
The suffocation.
Yeah, he says the sensation of suffocation, which is common in evocation, becomes even more intense. He says you'll feel like you're in a small elevator packed with a huge, noisy crowd.
That sounds less like a divine experience and more like a subway commute during rush hour.
Hey, if the demons are crowding the elevator, at least you aren't lonely.
But look at what happens next. He moves to the chalice. He says, take the chalice in your left hand, raise it above your head, and say, I drink the blood of God. I absorb all his power.
That is intense. It's so visceral. It's like calling. A spirit is a metabolic takeover.
It's a huge claim. He's saying the elixir flows through your veins, chasing away fatigue and reviving your purpose. It's a high-stakes way to prep for a ritual.
And then he gets into the actual mechanics of a square. He says the Anakim square is simple. The name Anakim is written twice, once vertically, once horizontally. And then watch this. He says one line will shine and the other will dim, and then they'll swap.
That's the active part of the geometry. The square isn't just a drawing, it's a breathing thing.
He even claims he's received entire sentences in Enochi in this way, through the shifting patterns of the letters, which provided him with prophecies for the months following.
Right. because when the ink starts moving on its own, that's definitely a sign and not a trick of the light or a highly suggestible brain.
But Seth, he's talking about the result of that intensity. He says the smoke changes from gray to a bright white mist. That's the first stage of materialization.
And that's where it gets scary. He says at this point the excitement becomes unbearable. You can't distinguish between the material temple and the spiritual side. He uses the word terrifying. He says, I use the word terrifying because I have never experienced anything other than horror at this stage of evocation when I called legions.
Yeah, that's the part where the chaos starts. He says the room fills with a cacophony of sounds, faces reaching for you, choking smells, even if the earth is shaking under the footsteps of giants.
And yet, his advice is, keep sitting.
Continue sitting in a state of excitement and allow the process of all materialization to go its course. He says you wait for the sudden slowdown, the moment where the influx stops. That's when you stand up and, with absolute omnipotence, command them to halt and obey.
It's such a massive swing, from the blood of God to commanding legions of giants.
And check out the payoff. He promises. He claims he called the legion, named a specific amount of money he needed, and within 48 hours he got the exact amount, plus an extra $1,500.
Of course, the demon summoning for cash trope. It's always the most convenient part of the ritual, isn't it?
But it brings us back to the central tension we started with. Is this modern mastery using authority to bend the hierarchy to your will, or is it a dangerous loss of self? He says the hardest part isn't the summoning, it's the dismissal. It is almost impossible to politely ask them to return.
That's a heavy thought to end on. The idea that you can invite the infinite into your room, but you might not be able to convince it to leave?
Okay, let's bring it back. We just finished the heavy part, the massive, terrifying influx of the giants. Now, Koetting is showing us the exit strategy. He says you have to gather all your focus and, standing before them, command them.
To go back where they came from.
Exactly. Return to whence they came and fulfill what they were tasked to do. He even gives a specific incantation to cleanse the temple. It's all this rhythmic, almost guttural nonsense. Asta datat kata sasta sex altamu part 2.
It sounds like a linguistic fever dream.
It really does. But look, he isn't done with the dangerous stuff. He moves immediately to a second square. And this one. This is the one that makes even the seasoned practitioners sweat. He calls it the Forbidden Enochian Square.
Oh man, I've heard the stories about the Enochian squares. They don't just bring guests, they bring a storm.
He says it's a mixture of fire and air. He claims it causes the heavens to pour an uncontrollable stream of fire onto the earth. He says the elemental spirits and angels collide in the temple, creating an explosion of ash and flame that can destroy everything in existence just to allow for recreation.
Destroy everything in existence. That is a massive exaggeration, Seth, even for a book titled Forbidden Rites. It's pure hyperbole to keep the reader on edge.
Maybe, but he says even looking at this square is dangerous if the magician isn't prepared for a rapid ascension.
An ascension or an incineration? There's no middle ground with him.
But check out the command he uses for it. He says, O mighty spirits of the great art of union, enter this temple as witnesses of universal providence. Fill this temple from wall to wall. He's not asking for a visit, he's demanding a takeover.
Fill this temple from wall to wall. He's basically inviting a crowd surge. No wonder he says the person doing it feels like they're being crushed.
And he says the sensation is like a furnace about to explode. You feel this tension, the struggle not between the spirits, but between your own conflicting energies. And then he goes back to that recurring theme, wait, filled with omnipotence and the universe will find its equilibrium.
It's that centrifuge idea again. You're the still point in the middle of the explosion.
But then this is where it gets actually useful. He pivots. He moves from these cosmic explosions to something much more organized. He introduces the house sigil.
Right. This is a different way to work. Instead of one entity, you call a house, a group of related entities that work together toward one goal, like a specialized task force.
So, instead of one demon, you get a whole department of them.
Exactly. He says they have a kinship, and he uses the House of Kel as an example. These are spirits of medicine and mechanics. Their whole job is, well, automatic healing.
Now that I can get behind. That's much more tantric in a way, restoring what is broken.
He says they don't just manifest what is missing. They improve the state of what already exists. If your finances are bad, or your relationships are cracking, or you're stuck in a career dead end, they don't give you a new life, they nourish the one you have.
Nothing is truly broken, it just needs more nutrients. That sounds like something a very expensive therapist would say.
But look at the ritual setup though. It's much more contained. 9 blue candles, 3 censers, and a triangle. The scent of frankincense. It's much more zen than the exploding Enochian fire.
But even here, he insists on the authority. You take the dagger, touch the sigil, and command, I call you, may your power become my power, and your knowledge become my knowledge.
It's all about that absorption. It's not just observing the magic, it's consuming it.
It's a lot of I am powerful, and I am godlike, and not much. Please, spirits, be kind.
That's the whole point of the book, Jane. The architect doesn't ask, he builds, he commands. He dictates the reality of the temple. Whether that's a beautiful house of Kel or a terrifying legion of giants, the method is the same. Absolute, unshakable authority. Okay, let's pick it back up. We're right in the middle of the House of Kel ritual. And the atmosphere is, well, it's shifting. He says that if you've done the work, if you've experienced that initial suffocation, these spirits will actually fill the temple with light and a sense of expansiveness.
Expanding the space. That sounds so beautiful. Like the walls are just dissolving.
Or like you're having a localized seizure. Let's not romanticize the lack of oxygen, M.
But look at what he says comes next. He calls it a psychological fugue. He wants you to meditate on the spirits, hear their voices in the air, and then, and this is the part we talked about earlier, he tells you to push yourself right to the edge of fainting.
And then
you take the chalice, raise it above your head, and say, I drink the blood of God. I absorb all his power.
We're back to the blood. He really loves his metaphors for metabolic takeover, doesn't he?
It's not a metaphor if the liquid is actually there, Jane.
Anyway, he says once you've drunk, you start adding incense, moving clockwise until the temple is thick with smoke. And then this is the technical part, you place both hands on the altar. Palms down, flanking the sigil.
he's using the body to anchor the sigil, like he's part of the circuit.
Exactly. And he says you use your dagger to trace the lines of the sigil, transferring your power through the blade and your vision into the paper. He claims that if you do this with astral vision, you'll see the entities starting to take quasi-dense forms. They'll flicker in and out of the veil.
Quasi-dense. That is a very convenient way to describe a hallucination that disappears the moment you blink.
But look at the command he gives for when they actually arrive. He says you don't just wait, you call them by name. Spirits of the House of Kel under the sign of Hod, led by Archangel Michael, descend here.
He's giving them a specific address, a celestial coordinate. He says you command them to take a visible form, to speak with an audible voice, and to help you with your specific goal.
And then he describes the smoke turning into white light, the bodies of the spirits forming out of the incense. He says the ecstasy becomes unbearable.
And there it is, the edge of fainting again. He's literally instructing the practitioner to induce a state of near unconsciousness so the rational mind can vanish.
Because that's where the higher wisdom takes over. He says that's when the spirits become most physical, most astounding.
But man, he drops a huge warning here. He says if you want something healed, don't be greedy. Don't ask them to fix everything at once.
Right. He says if you try to deceive them by demanding more than you actually need, the medicine turns into a poison. You'll actually weaken the very thing you're trying to fix.
Well, it's a convenient way to prevent anyone from actually testing the limits of the ritual. Don't ask for too much or it'll break.
But it makes sense, doesn't it? If you're working with equilibrium, you can't force a surplus.
It's an interesting pivot, though. After all this intense, high-stakes command, he ends the section on a note of surrender. He says once the work is done, just let the spirits go. Don't use a dismissal ritual. Just let them leave.
They might stay for a few minutes anyway. Like guests who linger too long at a party because they're waiting for you to run out of snacks.
But then the book takes a turn. A personal turn. He moves away from the how-to and into a memoir. He talks about a dark night of the soul that lasted 7 years.
Here we go. The shadow work.
He says in 2001 he burned all the bridges. He walked away from a high-ranking position in a notorious demonic church and joined an order that was much more Christian. He talks about being a fanatic, an ascetic living on a tiny island in a river, praying for hours.
From demonology to the Gospel of John. That is quite the career pivot.
But he says he used the same skills. He says he used his experience with evocation and extracorporeal travel to call upon angels. He wasn't changing the mechanics, he was just changing the target.
Yeah, he says his fanaticism and isolation actually unlocked his clairvoyance. He describes standing on this tiny sandbar, praying to El Shaddai, and feeling his mortal shell being filled by a power so great he'd lose all sense of himself.
The world ceased to exist. There was only me, God, and prayer.
It sounds like a very lonely way to live.
But he claims it worked. He says he could see the air thick with white mist. He says even without the incense or the candles, the materialization happened through his intense focus.
It brings us back to the beginning of the episode, doesn't it? The idea of the architect. Whether you're building a ritual for a demon or a prayer for an angel, the tool is the same. The architecture of your own attention.
Whether it's a poison or a medicine, it all depends on how much of yourself you're willing to lose in the process.
Oh, hold on. I definitely hear the doorbell, and it sounds suspiciously like my dinner has arrived.
Thank God I am absolutely starving.
All right, let's settle in. All right, everyone, let's settle in. We're deep into the territory now. We've been talking about the mechanics of command, but we're moving into something much more unstable.
Unstable is an understatement, Seth. I feel like I can practically feel the static in the air just looking at these pages.
That's just the energy from my dinner, Em. But seriously, I'm dialing in from my home studio today. And even through the mic, I'm feeling the weight of this. We're looking at Toting's account of, well, a spontaneous manifestation.
Let's call it what it is, a hallucination or a miracle, depending on how much you like drama.
Let's look at the text. He's describing this scene. He's by the water. He says the incense smoke is rising, but then he describes something else. Steam rising from the water hitting eye level. And instead of these thick, heavy shapes, he sees this special white light piercing every particle of the mist.
That sounds beautiful. Almost like a transition into a different frequency.
It gets more intense. He says, from the center of every particle of mist, the countenances of the angels I was calling emerged.
Here we go. The I saw angels in the steam trope.
Wait, Jane, look at how he frames it. He says he formulated a prayer based on this specific reality. He's calling out, El Shaddai, send down the angels to assist me in this sacred rite. Send me angels! Send me angels!
El Shaddai. You know, I was reading earlier, and that name is heavy. It's linked to the Mahdi ones. In some traditions, it's a plural concept or group of powerful beings.
It's interesting because he says this happened during an automatic evocation. He says his body began to sway. His mind didn't even want to stay conscious. It longed to fall into the darkness of oblivion.
He's describing a total loss of ego. He's fighting to stay excited, fighting to stay focused on the materialization. And then get this. He says the angels appeared about 2 to 3 feet above the water.
And he claims they were held up by rapid streams of wind, even though the air around him was absolutely still.
Okay, now that's a classic glitch in the Matrix moment.
Exactly. And he says they were fully materialized, visible to anyone. And the first thing they did, they spoke. A multitude of voices sounding like a song, but the words were perfectly clear. They were asking, how can we be of service?
Wait, stop right there. This is the part that always gets me. He says most people see this and dismiss it as a hallucination or treat it as a one-time religious revelation. But he claims he sees it as a turning point in the history of all existence.
Talk about an ego trip.
But look at his logic. He says this experience actually pushed him away from religion. He says instead of making him a religious fanatic, it made him follow his own unique path of experience, rather than blind faith and dead hope.
I mean, I get that. You can't worship a statue if you've actually felt the breath of the thing you're calling.
Right. But then he moves into the architect part of our theme. He says the path of ascension is personal. It doesn't belong to any religion or savior. It can be paved with ivory or burning sulfur. It depends on what the individual needs.
He's saying the method doesn't matter as much as the result.
Precisely. He claims the only things that break the ritual, the only things that shatter the power of the evoker, are doubt and fear. He says if you can eliminate those, you can achieve absolute certainty that there is only one possible result.
He's basically saying, if you believe hard enough, the universe has to obey. That sounds dangerously close to the subjective synthesis claim we talked about earlier.
It is. He's saying that through this, you move from unheard voices to loud thunder. He says you can literally take these results and put them in your pocket.
I'd settle for putting a little extra cash in my pocket, honestly.
But then he gets even more radical. He says this type of invocation, what the believers call prayer, can be used with anyone. He says he used the name El Shaddai first, but he's had the same results calling on Vishnu, Baphomet, Set, or Algal.
So it's not about the specific name, it's about the resonance?
Exactly. The only difference is which entities appear. He's adamant that these aren't just reflections of a fragmented mind, but real, intelligent individuals.
He's doubling down on the claim that they are real, existing individuals. It's a massive leap from the psychological approach.
He even gives practical advice here. He says you need the smoke of incense to fill the temple, and candles that match the nature of the deity. But then, and this is the kicker, he says the most effective invocation is spontaneous and unpracticed.
Like a jam session. You don't plan the notes, you just let the rhythm take you.
Exactly. He says the greatest lesson he learned was the ability to humble the ego and become a vessel for divine inspiration. He says if you can turn off your rational mind because it's too weak and prone to error, and instead rely on an external and perfect source, then your words and actions become perfect.
That sounds so heavy. To just let go of your own intellect entirely.
It sounds like a recipe for losing yourself in a way you can't come back from.
And that's exactly where he leaves us. He says the ritual must be spontaneous, as if the evoker himself was summoned by the deity. He's moving away from the rigid manual style of the old grimoires and into something much more wild. So, we've reached the point where the training wheels come off. Koetting is basically saying that once you've mastered the internal mechanics, the external tools, they become secondary. He says the moment when his desire, like an undeveloped thought form, could soar into the stratosphere to create change, became so familiar he could recreate it instantly.
That sounds like a massive shift in agency. It's moving from I'm following a recipe to I am the chef.
Or, I'm just hallucinating because I've memorized the steps so well, I don't notice the gaps.
But listen to his justification. He says because of the results he's had, he realized he could actually abandon the tools he used to follow so diligently. He's saying the spirits don't care if your circle is perfectly drawn or if your wand is painted strictly red and yellow.
I mean, if I'm a demon, I'm not checking the feng shui of your ritual space. I'm looking for the vibe.
Exactly. He says the tools are just for creating ritual dynamics. They are, and I quote, crutches. He says the real skill is recognizing the moment of metaphysical activation.
He uses this really beautiful metaphor here. He says you need to recognize that moment with the same childlike excitement you'd feel running into a room on Christmas morning to see the tree and the presents.
Great. So we're just using Christmas morning as a psychological anchor for summoning entities.
But look at where he takes the mechanics. He talks about the wand, or the dagger, the projections of your will. He describes the energy rising in your chest, traveling down your arm, through the blade, and into an object. And then he asks a question that hits our whole architect theme. Why can't you just direct your energy where it needs to go, through your fingers, instead of using a dagger?
Wait, so he's saying the dagger is just a pointer? Like a laser pointer?
Precisely. He says in the spiritual spheres, every point touches every other point. There is no intermediate space. So, if the energy is already there, the physical distance doesn't even matter. The tool is just a suggestion to your own mind.
That is so much more streamlined. It's less about the stuff and more about the flow.
It sounds like he's just describing a very intense form of visualization. The object is there, where you are. It's a classic way to bypass the physical.
But he's talking about more than the dagger. He even talks about the chalice. He says the whole point of the cup is to hold the elixir of life, to replenish the operator. But then, and this is wild, he says, you can reproduce that effect without the wine or the cup. You can just drink the blood of God in its pure form, by absorbing divine omnipotence into your soul.
Whoa. Okay, that went from use your fingers instead of a knife to become a literal vessel for the divine. Pretty fast.
It's a total dissolution of the container, the cup, the wand, the circle. They all just melt away into pure intention.
And yet, he still tells you to keep the altar. He says the altar is practical. He's being very careful not to lose his audience entirely.
Right, but he uses the altar to pivot to a huge critique of the old way. He addresses the triangle of manifestation. He acknowledges the tradition that the triangle is a sort of astral prison to trap the spirit, using the names of the tetragrammaton as a triple protection, because spirits are inherently harmful.
That's the classic Solomonic setup. I've got you trapped in this geometric cage, so behave.
Exactly, but he calls that an archaic belief that has been refuted by thousands of evocators. He claims the power we work with transcends all religious canons. You don't need the names of the Jewish God, or the Messiah, or the Holy Spirit.
He's stripping the ritual of its cultural armor. He's saying the magic works regardless of the label.
Which, if you think about it, makes the ritual much more dangerous. If there's no holy barrier, you're just standing in an open field with whatever shows up.
And he describes what happens when you drop that barrier. He says that as you advance, the triangle isn't even a place anymore. The entire temple, the whole room, becomes the site of manifestation. The spirit can appear anywhere, in any form, at its own whim.
That sounds like a recipe for a very messy house.
He says the spirit becomes more spontaneous, more lively. It can even bring its familiars with it. He's describing a state where the distinction between the ritual space and the spiritual world just evaporates.
It's like the boundary between the singer and the song disappears.
That's exactly it. The architect isn't building a cage anymore. He's just opening a door. Okay, we need to slow down. We've gone from tools are just crutched to something much more visceral. We're moving into the actual mechanics of breaking the circle.
And here comes the part where everyone loses their minds.
It's a metaphor, Jane. He's talking about the fundamental rule of any powerful ritual. You must have a circle drawn on the ground. And as long as that spirit isn't released or expelled, you do not, under any circumstances, cross that boundary.
Because the circle is the only thing standing between the magician and the lading abyss.
Exactly. He says the circle is the barrier between the physical world and the abyss, and between the human and their own limitless nature.
I love how he frames it. The circle is eternity, but it's a closed figure. To get to the real infinite, you have to move toward a single point, or, even better, nothing at all.
So, the goal is to eventually become nothing? That sounds less like magic and more like a bad Tuesday.
But look at the warning, Jane. He cites the diaries of almost every occultist who ever lived. He says you can find testimonies of madness or death for those who broke the circle during evocation.
That's heavy. Like actual physical or mental destruction.
But, and here's the pivot, he says there's a whole class of unpublished records. People who broke the boundaries of prudence and safety, not by accident, but on purpose. He says he went looking for them. He sat with them, and he found that their results were different.
He quotes one of them. Listen to this. We haven't just reached a new level. We are already playing a completely different game.
That is the most. I've discovered a secret line I have ever heard.
But he admits it's dangerous. He says starting without a circle is stupid and leads to death. He says evocation triggers processes in the human psyche that are, well, he says the power is so great, the flesh and mind can barely endure it. He says you have to enter the black waters of the abyss slowly until you feel like you can no longer breathe.
That sounds like the edge of a trance. Like that moment in yoga where the breath just stops being yours.
He actually gives a specific technique here. He says use the circle and the triangle as described before. But once the spirit has fully materialized, you erase the line of the circle that touches the triangle. You erase it from sight.
Wait, so you're intentionally weakening the defense?
Yes. He says as you erase it, you feel the magical protection dissipating. You are now completely defenseless against any malevolent influence the spirit might want to exert.
This is insane. If I'm standing there and the line is gone and I'm defenseless, why would I stay?
Because, and this is the core claim, he says if you aren't some self-righteous practitioner trying to use the name of a god to enslave a demon, the demon won't react. It won't break its chains or strike you with lightning. It will just wait for your greeting.
So the protection doesn't come from the chalk on the ground?
No. He says the protection comes from within, from the divine nature of the magician.
Okay, but he still links the danger to the psyche. He says the greatest danger isn't physical harm, but obsessive attachment to the spirit.
Right. He says the spirit enters your sphere of enough influence through a communication so subtle you might not even realize it's happening. And the danger comes from the evoker's own state. If you cross the line with trembling hands and a heart thumping in panic, the spirit will simply manifest your fears.
So if you think the abyss is going to eat you, it's going to eat you.
Exactly. But if you cross that line with absolute certainty that you are stepping into a new level of evolution, then that is your first step into infinity.
He's describing a psychological feedback loop. The ritual is a mirror.
Precisely. And then he outlines this 3-step process. First, you do the evocation with the circle and triangle. Second, you go back into the temple with only a circle, no triangle. You step out of the circle and meet the spirit in the open space of the temple.
And he says the first time you do this, you're likely to pass out.
Because the spiritual exhaustion is so intense, the mind starts lying to you. It tries to tell you that reality is inside the circle and subjective reality is in the triangle. It tries to reject the experience because it was programmed by society to do so.
My brain does that every time I try to meditate. This isn't happening. You're just sitting in a chair.
He says the masters often remain silent for long periods because the experience is too profound to put into words. He compares it to murder or intercourse.
Jesus!
He says it requires repetition to be integrated. The first time is an initiation into divinity, a violation of the rules that kept you safe but also kept you bound. The second time is the confirmation of your sovereignty. And by the third time, the drug of power starts to become addictive.
That is a heavy cost. The drug of power.
He even names the types of people this happens to: murderers, lovers, and ritual magicians.
I think I'm definitely in the ritual magician category, though I'm leaning heavily toward lover of Munchkin.
But then, the final step. An architect move, he says, perform the evocation with no circle and no triangle, from beginning to end.
Now we're just asking to be eaten by a demon.
He says you go to a remote place, describes driving into the American Southwest, away from the city lights. You draw a sigil on the ground, light a small fire, and use sage or oregano for incense. You meditate, you connect your energy to the spirit's energy, and you just wait.
No boundaries, no protection, just the self and the entity.
It's the total dissolution of the ritual structure. It's the end of the manual and the beginning of the pure, unmediated encounter.
I need a minute to recover from that imagery.
Agreed. Let's take a quick breather and grab some water. All right, everyone, let's settle in. All right, everyone, let's settle in. We're moving into a heavy section of Koetting's Evoking Eternity. We've been talking about the mechanics of command, but here he shifts from the how-to of summoning a spirit to something much more visceral. The angle today is the architect versus the vessel. Is the magician building a structure to hold a power, or are they just tearing themselves down to let it in?
I'm just glad I'm calling in from my couch today, Seth. If I were in the studio for this part, I'd be checking the ceiling for cracks.
Because of the earthquakes he promises?
Exactly. Look, he's describing the actual moment of contact. He says you pull the spirit to you using the smoke, the fire, the physical world. He gives the specific command. Hear my voice. See my signs. Let your power become my power.
Let your power become my power. Typical. He's asking for a hostile takeover of the ego.
But look at how he describes the physicality of it. He says you touch the face of the sigil, saturating the paper with light, and then he says the spirit will rise, and you will see it face to face, just like a person.
That sounds, well, almost too easy. Like, just walk up to a demon like you're meeting a neighbor.
But then he hits this pivot. He says the most unforgettable part isn't the sight, but the touch. He says the spirit's fingers don't press against your skin, but softly pass through muscle and bone.
Okay, that's officially creepy. That's not a handshake. That's a haunting.
It's like that time I was trying to play a heavy set, and the bass was so deep I could feel my teeth vibrating. It's not on you, it's through you.
That's the point. He says the spirit's mind doesn't even need a brain because it's everywhere. And when that touch happens, the practitioner ceases to be human for a moment. They become immortal. They become the spirit.
Wait, so he's saying the ritual isn't about bringing something here. It's about turning us into something else?
Exactly. He says a part of your soul leaves you and something else moves in.
Which is a great way to explain away a psychotic break, isn't it? Oh, I'm not losing my mind, Seth. I'm just experiencing a subjective synthesis.
Well, let's hold on to that skepticism, Jane, because the next part gets even more ambitious. He claims that because we are part of the machine of creation, we can use these methods to summon anything. Seraphim, jinn, even the dead. He says if you have the secret knowledge, everything will be brought to your door.
It's a wish fulfillment pitch. Bring me the keys to the universe and I'll put them on your hearth.
But, and this is a huge but, he introduces a massive caveat. He says you can't just jump into the deep end with the big players. He says if you try to evoke a demon when you're only used to simple planetary spirits, you might get swallowed by hellfire.
He's actually being somewhat cautious here, which is surprising. He says the danger isn't just the spirit, but our own. Patterns of perception, prejudices, and fears.
Or the limits of the material world being unable to hold a god. I mean, talk about high stakes. He's basically saying if you summon a deity, you might trigger an earthquake or a hurricane.
I mean, I've seen a bad comedy set because of riot, but a hurricane? That's a bit much, even for me.
But look at how he proposes we handle the big ones. He moves away from command and toward devotion. He says for a deity, you need 2 levels of devotion. The first is intellectual studying the ancient texts, the history.
And the second is the actual lifestyle. You have to live as if the deity is already there, wearing their colors, carrying their symbols. It's almost like a continuous ritual.
It sounds less like magic and more like a cult of one. Every minute, every word must serve the deity.
But look at the method he prescribes for the actual evocation. He says you don't command them. You pray. You kneel. You let the deity fill you. He says the deity won't appear in a solid form right away. Instead, they just thicken the presence. The air gets heavier or lighter or colder. It's not a materialization. It's a condensation of their omnipresence into your room.
That's actually beautiful. It's not a puppet appearing on a stage. It's the atmosphere changing because something massive is leaning into the room.
Or it's just a drafty window and a sudden drop in barometric pressure.
Hey, if the air gets thick enough to touch, I'm in. But I'm staying seated. I've had enough explosions for 1 month.
He ends this section by saying the I must undergo a full metamorphosis before the deity will ever show a face. You have to break the self to see the divine.
It's the cost. You get the god, but you lose the person.
Okay, let's look at where he's going next. He's moving away from the theory and into the actual, the script. He says these incantations weren't written by him, but given to him by entities that exist outside any classification.
Outside any classification. That's a pretty big claim, Seth.
It is, and he says they're fiery in nature so much so that an untrained eye might mistake them for demonic or infernal.
Of course, everything is demonic if you are part of the in crowd.
But look at how he describes the language itself. He says it's concise, mostly untranslatable, and carries a wild, untamable magic power that makes any mantra or sutra he's ever encountered look like child's play.
I mean, if you're the guy who discovered the language, of course it's better than everything else. That's like a chef saying his secret sauce is better than every other sauce in history.
True, but he gives very specific instructions on how to say it. You have to use a clear, calm voice. No pauses. You don't finish one word before starting the next. It has to be a continuous, rhythmic stream.
Like a loop? Like a mantra that builds on itself?
Exactly, he says the repetition actually speeds up naturally. The first few times, it's just to tune your mind to the rhythm, letting the energy enter your being. But then, he says after the third repetition, the effect starts.
And here comes the payoff.
He quotes his own work, Works of Darkness, describing the mental state. He says your mind and body soar into the higher stratosphere of the soul. And then this is the part that ties back to what we said earlier about the brain. He says the brain gets tired of the complex phrases and just switches off.
So the brain literally shuts down to let the magic happen?
He says that. He says the words start to blur, they trip over each other. You might even start making up new words that sound just as alien. He calls it reaching critical mass. The spell becomes independent of the magician's will. It's just ringing in the air.
The spell is audible only to the mage and his god. That is the best way to avoid a peer review, Seth. If you didn't hear it, you just aren't vibrating high enough.
Hey, I've been at concerts where the sound engineer was the only one who could hear the bass. But wait, he says this leads to glossolalia? Like speaking in tongues?
Yeah. He says it can lead to temporary dementia, where you're shaking on the floor, lost in ecstasy, or even convulsing in your temple. He compares it to voodoo, or Pentecostalism.
That sounds intense, and honestly a little terrifying. You're basically inviting a complete loss of self.
And he's calling it grace.
But, and here is the crucial part, he says the real work isn't the explosion. He says the most important part is the silent unity with the god. That you start every day and end every day with that deity in your heart.
Okay, I can get behind that. That's just being a devotee. That's not a heart attack, that's just lifestyle.
But then he scales it up. He talks about the 13th day. After 13 days of this devotion, you move to the next level association. You start evocation of the servants of that god to ask them how to actually bring the big boss into physical form.
So first you lose your mind, then you spend 2 weeks interviewing the help.
And he says the spirits will be wary at first. They won't just give you the blueprint. You have to be persistent. But eventually, they'll tell you the specifics. And this is where it gets, he says, standard sigils and incense aren't enough.
What else is there?
He says the spirits might tell you that the incense needs to be warm steam rising from fresh blood, or that the symbol must be carved directly into the skin of the magician.
Okay, no, I'm out. I'm officially staying on my couch.
See? This is what I'm talking about. It's not spirituality. It's a recipe for a crime scene.
He claims it's necessary. He says the 4th level preparation requires flawless execution of these instructions. He says the danger of invoking a deity is so high that the power could force oceans to swallow even the highest mountain peaks.
It sounds like he's describing a total environmental catastrophe.
And then, the 5th level. The final level. Sacrifice.
I knew it was coming. I felt it in my bones.
He says everything great is built on blood. He says you don't call a god for a small errand. You called him to trigger the apocalyptic harvest and bring back the Garden of Eden. He claims that without blood sacrifice, you simply cannot expect a deity to appear in physical form.
Well, I guess I'll just stick to my morning tea and a bit of yoga. It's much less likely to cause an apocalypse.
But you have to admit, Seth, There's something strangely magnetic about the idea that there's a way to make the divine actually tangible, even if the price is, well, everything.
Okay, we are officially in the deep end now. We've moved past the how-to, and we are reading Koetting's personal account of the 17th initiation. This isn't just a manual anymore, it's a memoir of a heavy-duty encounter.
17th initiation. Does he ever just, I don't know, go to the grocery store without a cosmic checklist?
Apparently not. He says his order gives tasks based on individual spiritual, emotional, and psychological needs. And as you progress, the stakes just escalate. He says by the time you hit the 18th initiation, each exam can take months or even years to pass.
Man, I can barely commit to a gym membership for a month. This guy is playing a completely different game.
He is, and look at the date December 18th, 2002. He says he received instructions for this 17th task to evoke a god in physical form. But, and here's the kicker, he won't even name the entity. He just calls it D in his diaries.
That's such a classic occult move. I can't tell you who it is, but trust me, it's huge.
It's also a perfect way to avoid anyone calling him out on hallucination. Oh, D was great, but I can't tell you his name because of cosmic secrecy.
True, but look at the setting he chooses. He describes a night with a full moon and this incredibly thick, unusual fog. He finds this abandoned racquetball court right next to one of the oldest cemeteries in the country. It's an open-air hall made of cinder blocks with no roof, just the moon hanging over it.
An abandoned sports court next to a graveyard? That's not a ritual space, Seth. That's the opening scene of a low-budget horror movie.
It's atmospheric, I'll give him that. He says the silence was ringing, and he could almost feel his spells traveling through the air to reach sleeping people. He goes in, meditates, and starts drawing the circles. He uses a large piece of chalk to draw the main circle, and then a smaller one to the west, with 3 foreign signs marking the vertices of an invisible triangle.
Wait, he's using foreign signs to mark a triangle? That sounds so geometric, yet so alien.
It's very precise. He places a bowl in the smaller circle and pours in what he calls the base for embodiment. He says the smell and the thick vapors alone were enough to provide the spirit a body, without even needing fire or smoke.
See, this is where I lose it. A substance so potent, it creates a body via scent. I mean, come on.
But then he gets to the sacrifice. He says he mixes blood with that base substance in the bowl. And the second he starts the incantations, the presence of D arrives much faster and closer than he expected. He says the dark vapors started rising from the bowl, and the body of his god began to form right in front of him.
And let me guess, it wasn't a cute little sprite.
No, he describes it as a giant figure shrouded in shadows, as tall as the walls of the court. Its eyes were shifting from fiery red to an unearthly green, and its voice. It didn't come from a mouth, Paco. It erupted from its chest like thunder.
That's not a conversation. That's an acoustic trauma.
And here's the moment where he almost fails the test. He says he had practiced the greeting for so long, but the moment he saw this thing, his mind went blank. He forgot the whole script. All he could manage was, with as much confidence as he could muster, D, give me all your power.
Oh my god, that is the most human moment in the whole book. He's terrified, he's looking at a mountain of shadow, and he just blunders.
Give me your power. It's like a teenager asking a superhero for a ride to the mall.
But look at the reaction. He expected mockery, but D actually laughed. A joyful laugh. And instead of crushing him, the entity says, you already possess it.
Wait, that's a total reframe. He's there trying to steal power, and the god basically tells him, stop looking outside and look at yourself.
Exactly. He says the entity started instructing him like a patient teacher on how to manipulate his own subtle bodies. But then, it gets even more intense. The entity reaches out its hand, passes it over the line of the circle, and asks if he wants to follow.
And there it is. The trap. The classic leave the circle and die moment.
He admits he was terrified. He wondered if this was a trap to hand him over to demons or throw his soul into hell. But he couldn't say no. He says he soared out of his physical body through the open roof of the court.
And where did he go?
He says he didn't see the city. He saw the panorama of all creation. And D wasn't dark or terrifying anymore. He looked like a being of pure magnificent power. He says he was blinded by the grace radiating from him.
So the terror was just his own ego's reaction to something it couldn't process?
That's exactly what he's claiming. And then, the entity looks down at the entire universe, the stars, the galaxies, and says, all of this is yours, if you can take it.
I mean, the marketing is incredible. The universe is yours. Just follow the instructions and don't die.
He says the entity then showed him 3-dimensional visions of how to use pure creation and destruction to accelerate his will. And then, just as suddenly, he was shoved back into his body. He doesn't even know if his physical body was still awake or if it had fallen into a trance.
I think if I did that, I'd be out of commission for a week. My brain would be fried.
He says it was too exhausting for any flesh, but he ends this account with a massive claim. He says, since that day he has learned to control his evocation. He says, through evocation, he gained power over the earth and its elements. He says he has summoned legions to war.
He's claiming he's become a cosmic general.
He says, and I quote, I learned from a god that through these secret and forbidden sciences I can become just like him, and even more so.
And much better for the teeth. No blood required. Oh, hold on, I think I heard the doorbell. The Mexican food is actually here.
Perfect, because if I have to hear about cosmic generals for one more minute without a taco, I'm going to revolt.
Alright, we're diving back into the glossary section of Koetting's Evoking Eternity. It's easy to skip these, but honestly, the way he defines his terms sets the entire stage for his architect approach.
It's like looking at the building materials before you see the blueprint. And some of these definitions are a little intense.
Intense is one word for it. I'm just glad I'm calling in from home today. Otherwise, I'd be trying to debate the metaphysics of this in person.
Don't get too comfortable, Paco. We're still here. And Seth, look at this first bit. He's talking about the Ouija board. He says the telekinetic force of the spirit moves the pointer to deliver messages.
Right, and he links it to the operator's native alphabet. It's interesting because he's framing even a popular parlor game as a technical tool for communication.
It's a bit reductive, isn't it? Like he's stripping all the mystery out of it and just making it a data transfer.
But that's his whole point, isn't it? That the mechanics are what matter. He's even jumping from that straight into Hindu devas and Protestant exorcism.
Wait, did he just put Protestant exorcism in the same glossary as Hindu deities? Talk about a wild mix.
He's trying to show that the underlying power transcends the religious labels. But look at his definition of Kabbalah. He explicitly claims it is the foundation of most major Western occult systems.
Which, fine, historically we can argue that, but he's using it to anchor his entire framework. He's building a hierarchy where everything flows back to this one source.
And then he hits Nexion. This one actually gave me chills reading it. He says a Nexion is a gateway to another world that doesn't obey causal laws and, get this, it always opens through a living organism.
A person, an animal, or even a whole civilization. That's heavy. It's a biological breach.
It sounds less like magic and more like a localized apocalypse.
It ties back to his earlier claim about the subjective synthesis. If you're the Nexion, you're observing the gate and you are the gate.
But then he pivots to neo-paganism and calls it a mix of Kabbalah and undefined animism. It's almost like he's trying to categorize everything into his own little box.
He's definitely the architect, isn't he? He's laying down the laws of the land. And Egregore is an entity created for small or global goals. It's so transactional.
It's exactly what I was saying earlier. There's no surrender here. He's talking about pathworking as a structured approach to ascension, but it sounds like a corporate training manual for the soul. Step by step, gradually increasing complexity.
It is very much a technical manual. He even defines sigil as a sign belonging to one specific spirit and no other. It's about identification and command.
But look at Aeon. He says it's the largest measure of time, and it ends with world-scale destruction and astronomical anomalies.
Oh, man, the stakes are high. You aren't just summoning a demon to clean your room, you're potentially triggering the end of an era.
Exactly. It's all expansion and destruction. It makes me wonder if the architect is actually just building a much larger cage.
That's the question, isn't it? Is the structure protecting us from the chaos, or is it just the mechanism we use to invite it in? So, there we have it. We've journeyed from the technical, almost clinical glossary of Nexions and Egregores, all the way to the visceral, blood-soaked shadows of a racquetball court. We've seen the architect attempt to map out the infinite, trying to turn the terrifying unknown into a series of programmable commands.
It's been such a heavy, intense ride. We started by looking at the mechanics of command, and we ended up staring directly into the eyes of something that claims to be the universe itself. Whether you believe in the D of it all, or see it as a masterclass in psychological projection, you can't deny the sheer scale of the vision.
I'm just sitting here thinking about my next dental appointment. If they start asking me to carve sigils into my molars, I'm moving to a different planet. But seriously, whether it's cosmic generalship or just a very intense way to write a memoir, Koetting certainly knows how to keep a reader and a podcast on the edge of their seat.
As long as it doesn't involve me being a biological breach for a Nexion, I'm fine. I'll stick to my tea and my much more predictable, non-apocalyptic reality.
And that is where we must leave the shadows of Evoking Eternity. We've traversed the architecture of the extreme, looking for the line where the magician's will ends and the divine begins. It's been a profound, if slightly unsettling, exploration of what happens when we try to build a bridge to the infinite.
It's been an absolute privilege to walk through these dark corridors with all of you. Thank you for bringing your curiosity and your skepticism to the table.
And thanks for sticking around, even when things got, well, fiery.
Until next time, keep looking for the patterns in the chaos, but maybe keep your feet firmly planted on the ground. Goodbye, everyone.
Don't forget to lock your doors.